and into trouble. Now the worries are there only for his rivals. And Joseba Balaki, who was the only man to match the Texan on the climb to La Mongie. The first blow has been struck. Lance is in yellow, but the road continues upward. What will the Pyrenees hold today? Find out next on OLN. Stage 12 is underway. Lance Armstrong decked out in yellow once again as what's left of this field winds its way around and up into the Pyrenees again on a devilish and monstrous route. Hi again, everybody, and welcome back to OLN's continuing coverage of the Tour de France. Bill Patrick with you, flanked as always by Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen. We are standing at Plateau de Bay, the site of the finish of Stage 12. And this tour has taken on a completely different look. Why? Because we're in the mountains. And Lance Armstrong is in control once again of this event. Now, before we get to Lance and before we get to this most inhuman stage, Phil, let's talk about yesterday, U.S. Postal. What a team.
Yes, indeed. The French used a phrase this morning, comme d'habitude, which literally means business as normal, because Lance Armstrong, first day in the mountains, has taken the race lead yet again. But he did it just with the limit of the day's racing ability, because I think he was saving energy for what is to come today. He only went to the front for the first time in the last 50 metres or so of the stage. Until then, he relied on, quote, my best team and the best team in the Tour de France. I think he's right.
Well, let's talk about how tough it is being a team leader. Let's look at the other Americans who are trying to be like Lance. It's not easy.
No, of course it's not easy. Look at the other team leaders. They're all in trouble at the moment. But Lance Armstrong is the captain of the ship. He controls every facet of U.S. Postal. He knows exactly what he wants in this race, and he goes out and he methodically takes it. And I think this highlights too by the fact, just take a look at the other American team leaders. Tyler Hamilton in trouble yesterday, and also Levi Leipheimer. No, it's not easy.
No, it's not. And speaking of things that are not easy, American Jonathan Vaughters, this poor guy can't win for losing, Paul.
Well, you know, it's very tough, and what you have to realise at the Tour de France is that it is a tough bike race. Jonathan Waters now for the fourth time not being able to finish the Tour de France. But it's not as if he's just cruising around trying to finish this bike race. He does have responsibilities. He has to work for the team, and at the end of the day, he's left an awful lot of energy on the roads so far in this year's Tour.
Well, yesterday we saw a very, very tough stage. Today, even tougher?
I think it's a lot tougher today because before they come to the final climb of the day, there are 4 big mountain passes to drag their bodies over. And if you look at the skies here, it's going to be a very hot day in the valleys. It will be a hard climb up to the finish here today. And again, we'll see huge time differences.
All right, Paul. Phil, what do we expect? What can we see at the top of Plateau de Bay?
Well, at the end here, only the second time we've come to the finish here. The last time, I think it was 1998, Marco Pantani was the winner. We might see a lone rider escaping today, someone who's pulling back time on Armstrong at nothing to worry about. Or you might see that simply the strongest man climbs to the victory. And if it is the strongest man, it'll be Lance Armstrong.
It's got to be strong indeed. I got to tell you something, folks. I couldn't believe how steep this final ascent was. We almost burned out a clutch in our car coming up here. Paul takes us through this most brutal of stages.
Continuing the journey towards the east across the Pyrenees, the 12th stage takes the riders from Lannemezan to Plateau de Bay. It's a ride of 199 kilometers, and there are some pretty serious cols along the way. As they move away from Lannemezan, which is at 600 meters above sea level, it's fairly flat to begin with. But after 56 kilometers, they hit the first climb of the day, the Col de Mont, followed rapidly by the Col de Porte d'Aspet. A little respite in the middle before then heading up the Col de Corps. A large plunge down into the valley below, the penultimate climb of the day. At 155 kilometers covered is the Col de Port. And then it's the big one to finish. And they should all know this, the Plateau de Bay at 199 kilometers. This is a course that could well be very difficult for Lance Armstrong and his U.S. Postal team to control the attacks of the Spanish climbers.
Paul, thank you very much. The GC now has a familiar look to it. Lance, once again, is the leader of the pack. Only 2 men, Balaki and Gonzalez de Galdeano, are within 3.5 minutes of him. Two more Once teammates, Jose Azevedo and Marcos Serrano, are 6th and 7th. It'll be very interesting to see how they figure into today's Once strategy. Tyler Hamilton and Levi Leipheimer, although they're 11th and 15th respectively, lost a great deal of time to Armstrong yesterday. As for the other Americans, as we said, it's not easy trying to become team leaders. Ask Bobby Julich and Kevin Livingston of Telecom. It's another picture postcard day in the Pyrenees. We're enjoying ourselves. Let's see how the riders are faring as we send it on over to the voices of the Tour de France, Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
Thank you very much, Bill. Well, we're looking at the race now. Some 50 miles, 80 kilometers to go. We're winging down the descent here of the Col de la Cour, and we're heading now for the Col de Port and then on to the finishing climb itself. So a good 2 hours cycling lying ahead of us, and we're looking here at a chase group at the moment. Let me tell you, out front is Laurent Jalabert, Laurent Dufaux and Isidre Nozal. At some 3 minutes we have the group we're looking at here: Veronk, Mazzolini, Martinez and Bocharov. We're at the back of the peloton right now with Jens Voigt, who's just coming back onto the tail. The peloton containing, of course, all of the men that matter, including Lance Armstrong, and at the latest time check, 4 minutes and 16 seconds between Armstrong and this wonderful attacking cyclist Laurent Jalabert. So the riders are just coming down, and we'll have a look back at earlier in the day as the riders were climbing the first climb of the day at the Col de Mont, and that was where over the top went Christophe Auriol. He was a rider who was clear at the time, by the way, and then some 34 seconds later he was chased over the top by Laurent Jalabert. This man getting away from the peloton on the climb and crossing the gap and reaching eventually Christophe Auriol on the descent. And then there was a small group of other riders, including David Echeverria, who were chasing behind. And it was a couple of minutes or so back to the bunch containing Lance Armstrong, well in control, of course, his team all on the front as they went over the top of the Col de Mont with 143 kilometers. Then it was on to the next climb, the Col de Porte d'Aspet. Not a steep climb, not a long climb. They went past the memorial to Fabio Casatelli. Jalabert in control this time, joined now by Laurent Dufaux and Nozal. Those three riders forming quite an alliance. They were 5 seconds behind Jalabert at the top. When he went over the top there, by the way, he became the leader in the King of the Mountains. The peloton still happy in a wonderful day's sunshine. 3 minutes back, Lance Armstrong looking very, very well indeed. And then came the massive climb, some 14 kilometers of the first category climb of the Col de la Cour. Jalabert, Dufaux, Nozal still clear of the field and still enjoying a good day out. There was a small group in between, not making a great deal of progress, but the main field coming over at some 4 minutes behind, and all the men that matter were in there. Now, a little incident along the road today, a bit of a punch-up, as we might say back home in England, as two riders here on the right, Carlos Sastre, clashing with Francis Moreau. From what we could see, Moreau started it, Sastre tried to finish it, and we'll wait to see if the referees take any action on that. But normally, a fight means disqualification.
And that's the difficult thing about racing in the Tour de France these days, because the cameras are absolutely everywhere. This is the magnificent river of the Ariège here, Phil, and I have to say this is going to be a very long, hard, difficult mountain stage, because at 200 kilometers, 125 miles, and the heat as well, it's going to make it a very difficult day when the riders come here to the final climb of the day, the Plateau de Bay, and I think we will see a literal explosion in the main field. And already it's US Postal Service who've been on the front setting all of the tempo, and in fact the tempo that they have set has reduced the numbers in the main field quite dramatically already.
Well, massive crowds here in the Pyrenees today, and what is one of the hottest days we can recall. It's a beautiful day, but I have to tell you that when we started out this morning after some 30 kilometers of racing, Robin McEwen, the Australian, wanted his green jersey back, which he gave back to Eric Zabel yesterday, and he won the sprint, but Zabel finished second, so that fight has come down to a single point in it. And this is, we are talking of two sprinters here on two really tough mountain stages, so that competition is definitely going all of the way to Paris. Stuart O'Grady was also there. He was in third place, so that's becoming a three-man race to Paris for green. One of the best times, one of the best competitions we've seen for that green jersey for some years.
Well, here are the three leaders, and these men really going out on what is going to be a very hard day towards the end of this afternoon. Laurent Jalabert stuck in the middle there. On the front here is Laurent Dufaux, the leader of the Alessio team, and at the back there Isidro Nozal. And by the way, the Once rider has done nothing at all so far to contribute to the success of this breakaway. He's obviously riding a defensive role for the team.
It's a nightmarish stage. 3 climbs are done, 2 remain, including the vicious 16-kilometer ascent to Plateau de Bay. It is stage 12 of the Tour de France. OLN's coming. And welcome back on a beautiful day here in the Pyrenees. Bill Patrick with you at the site of the finish of stage 12, Plateau de Bay. You see Richard Virenque's group about to be caught by the approaching peloton behind them. And now it's time for a U.S. Postal Service team update. See how Lance and the boys are faring. As you all know, Lance is in yellow once again, the overall leader of the race. And you look at the times of Harras, Rubiera, Ekimov, Hincapie, and everyone else on the team, and it's really important to note just what a job this team did yesterday in getting Lance across the finish line ahead of Belaki. Their times are really not as important as it is that they work as hard as they can to get Lance across ahead of everybody else and remain in yellow. What will happen today? Well, we don't know. Let's go back to Phil and Paul and find out.
Main field.
And here is the fast-pedaling Eddie Mazzolini. He's just shed his 2 mates in the breakaway, his 3 mates rather, in the breakaway, because he saw the peloton closing in very rapidly, thought he'd give it one more shot, and he's still out on his own. But he's got a lot of work to do. As we look now at Lance Armstrong, feeling the heat of the day, and looking pretty good, looking as though everything here is under control. He hasn't been put up under any pressure by Yoshiba Belocchi. It'll be showdown time, I think, again on the finishing climb. Much harder climb than yesterday, the Plateau de Bay, because the riders here know that the gradient doesn't ease until you get to the line. And if you're feeling strong, you can really make some ground, Paul.
Well, Marco Pantani made some serious ground here in 1998 when he won this stage by almost 1.5 minutes. Armstrong, like all the other riders this afternoon, Phil, really suffering from the heat. It's around about 23 degrees Celsius here at the summit of the climb, and that is quite rare in the Pyrenees because we're well over 6,000 feet in altitude, and in the valley roads here we're looking at 35 degrees Celsius, which is pushing up very close to almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Well, just look down here at the front of the peloton. It looks to be about 60 strong. A lot of riders, again, have taken it hard on the first 3 climbs, as we see the US Postal team in full cry. Seeing George Hincapie just pass through our lens, he wears the white sunglass rims there. Everybody talking this morning about how good it was to see a sprinter like George Hincapie helping Armstrong on the climbs. It was remarkable.
And let's not forget, George Hincapie is a very tough bike rider, and he's also a very talented bike rider too. He's come to this Tour de France with only one responsibility, and that is to work for Lance Armstrong. He's very capable of rivaling the best in the world in races like the Tour of Flanders, Paris-Roubaix and Liège-Bastogne-Liège. But he has got a very big engine, as they say in cycling jargon. He knows how to work hard, and he stays with Armstrong for as long as is absolutely possible. But I think Armstrong was right yesterday when he said in the press conference, this year they have put together the best US Postal Service team ever that they've come to the Tour de France with. And this is why we haven't seen them in the first part of the Tour de France. They knew that coming into the big mountains, Phil, they had to take control of the race. They would have to do an awful lot of work. And we've still got 4 more mountain stages to come after this one.
Yes, a little bit surprised that they're only second in the team race of 21 teams. They've got about 3 minutes to make up to take the lead away from the Once team currently. And there's every indication that might happen. There's George, looking pretty cool out there today, as he makes his way now. We're crossing the sort of valley roads as we head towards the climb of the Col de Port. And once over the top of that, we'll drop down into Tarascon, and then we'll head towards the Plateau de Bay. Marco Pantani cleaned up here in 1998. He won by, I think it was 1 minute and 25 seconds at the top on his own. And the big winners of the Tours love to do that, and I wonder if Lance will spoil the day again for the attackers and whip up his team as they approach. He'll wait and see, I think. Their progress is sweet, but they are still losing ground on the leaders. They're now over 5 minutes behind, and very shortly in the next 20 seconds or so, that's what he's looking for, Laurent Jalabert, which happens to be the win bonus, then there's a good chance that he will be the leader on the road. But I don't think he'll be the leader in the finish house.
There's still an awful long way to go to the finish, and there's a couple of nasty little climbs before we get there. And this final climb up here, Phil, at 16 kilometers in length, 10 miles, and an average gradient of 8% really is a killer. And it's really difficult as you hit the bottom of the climb, and it's only the last couple of kilometers where the gradient actually tends to level off just a fraction. But I think we will see a superb attack. But Armstrong, I think, tactically will look and see what the reaction is to the guys who he feels might want to challenge him on these final slopes today.
Well, as they challenge this most mountainous of stages, U.S. Postal controlling the peloton. We'll see what happens. Meanwhile, here's our Expedia.com trivia question as we go to break. The question, when were the Pyrenees first included in the Tour de France? The answer when we come back. We left you with this question, our Expedia.com trivia question. When were the Pyrenees first included in the Tour de France? If you were paying attention earlier this week, you knew. We discussed it. It was 1910. And one of the riders back then referred to the race organizers as murderers for including the Pyrenees in the Tour. Back then, of course, the roads were not paved over the mountains. They were dirt roads, and they all thought it was impossible. Some might even agree today. And now this stretch has a macabre nickname. It's known as the Circle of the Dead Men. Now let's go back to Phil and Paul.
We're looking at Richard Virenque here. The three riders who have been left by Eddie Mazzolini, who heard the peloton was closing in rather quickly. Clearly they're still holding off the peloton. And we haven't got a time check on them as we speak. But as I speak, I can hear time checks coming over on the radio. So we're Britain to you. It's 3 minutes 50 is the gap now to Eddie Mazzolini, and 4 minutes 40. So Mazzolini has taken a minute out of these boys. Here they come. The group of the chasers, 4:46, they're saying on television. We've never agreed with the official time checks throughout the whole race so far, but we're always close. And finally, 5 minutes straight for the peloton of Lance Armstrong, and we're looking at those now. All of his teammates driving the train. 5 minutes then to Laurent Jalabert. Laurent Jalabert started the day 5 minutes 53 seconds behind Lance Armstrong. Well, it's remarkable. If only he hadn't have had that nasty bit of trouble in the team time trial when Michael Sandstad, who by the way is quite seriously injured after his crash yesterday. We'll tell you some more about that in a moment. But Laurent Jalabert, if he hadn't been stopped in his time trials, it would have been the leader on the road right now.
He'd been the leader on the road right now by almost 2.5 minutes. It's interesting to know that right now the main field is slowly but surely pegging back the gap to the three leaders, because the check on the main peloton for these three leaders is actually now down to just 5 minutes. As we look at the front breakaway of three men, Isidro Nozal, the Once rider at the back, and he was in fact the leading young rider in the Tour de France just a few days ago. He has not done anything at all to help the success of this breakaway. And psychologically, that is always very difficult when you're in a breakaway situation, because you feel as if you're giving the guy at the back a free ride. But we do have to really take our hats off today to US Postal Service once again, Phil, because they are doing an absolutely magnificent job, and they're about to pick up Richard Virenque on the roads of the Tour de France today. So Virenque will be back in the US Postal train right now.
Well, as you look at Virenque here, I can just quickly tell you that Michael Sandstad is still in hospital under observation, but he did break 8 ribs in the crash yesterday and have severe breathing problems, but they say he will be okay. The peloton being led, of course, by US Postal, the maillot jaune on the shoulders of Lance Armstrong. Tracking him, it looked like the white jersey, the new white jersey today of Yvon Basso. Had a great ride yesterday, finished 7th on the stage, almost got 4th place, and has gone up to 7th overall, but that position means he's the best young rider. David Miller, it's all 7s this. David Miller lost 7 minutes yesterday, he's now down to 27th place.
Still quite a large number of riders in the group, but even so, already there will be large groups of riders off the back of the main field just hoping to try and survive over the next couple of stages, because we're looking at some very hard days for the bike riders at the Tour de France right now. The man on the front is Yaroslav Ekimov, the Olympic time trial champion. Victor Hugo Peña will take up the pacemaking right now. Floyd Landis there in 4th position. He had a very tough day yesterday, Phil. He lost himself an awful lot of time, and in fact, as we were just off camera looking at the back end of the main field, the main peloton led by US Postal Service also picked up Martinez and Bocharov as well. So the race situation at the moment, the 3 leaders, the 1 chaser at 350 is Eddie Mazzolini, and the main field slowly but surely starting to reduce the gap.
Well, Mazzolini decided to prolong the agony, I think. He picked up a minute very quickly. As you can see, that's just about what he's got over the peloton. Relentlessly charging along the valley here on a wonderful day in the Pyrenees for the spectators. It's a scorching day for the riders. They must be like racing through a cauldron today.
Plenty of time to catch up. 63 kilometers to go in stage 12 and 2 very tough climbs still to come. Also still to come, a 30-minute, that's right, 30-minute commercial-free half hour. Don't go away. And welcome back. We'll get you back to the stage 12 action in a moment, where understandably almost all the attention is being focused on Lance and the climbers. But keep this in mind, the most competitive race of all, even during these mountain stages, continues to be the one for not the yellow jersey, but the green, between Robbie McEwen and Eric Zabel. Well, the first intermediate sprint today came at the 30K mark. McEwen surging ahead of Zabel to take 6 points. Zabel took 4, so that means, as I speak, Zabel leads McEwen by a slim point. One more sprint was contested, but they were not involved. No more hot spots today. A maximum of 20 points at the end, but of course, tomorrow is another sprinter stage, so look for those two to mix it up again in stage 13. All right, let's send it back to Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen as stage 12 continues.
The long, thin blue line, and they're just pulling this race remorselessly along. They've picked up everybody now except Eddie Mazzolini, and the 3 front runners, the pacemakers today, Laurent Jalabert, Laurent Dufaux and Isidre Nozal. Nozal has been the passenger up front ever since he joined the breakaway. The other 2 haven't requested him to work. They understand he's part of the team, but what he is doing is a great bonus for the team Once. With a man up there, if that breakaway was to succeed, they'd move ahead of, well, not ahead, but further ahead of US Postal in the team race.
Just to explain the team race, it's the time of the 3rd man in the team which is added up together. So at the end of the day, it's a competition which measures the strength and depth of every individual team in the race. You have to have 3 men finishing high up on each individual stage to try and win that classification. And for the last 2 years, that honor has gone to Team Kelme. There's a Kelme rider just at the back here as well, who will be going to look after the rest of his teammates and dropping back to pick up some more drinks on a day like this, as Francisco Cabello drops back through the main line of cars. These guys can take on probably between 10 and 15 bottles today, because 1 or 2 bottles get wasted just spraying the riders with water to try and keep themselves cool.
Absolutely, especially on these vicious climbs. Just to refresh your memories, where we are now in the Pyrenees, we are heading towards the start of the climb of the Col de Port, which will take us up to 44 kilometers to go. We're currently running at just on 60 kilometers from the finish. Still a very healthy peloton here. They split up on the climbs that we've had, but they race back in to huddle together before the next climb does more damage. There's not all of the race here, of course. A lot of them now are forming big groups behind and just trying to keep a steady pace to get home before the barrier closes and the time limit will apply. Yesterday, everybody came home. Nobody was eliminated, but sadly 4 riders gave up on the road, including 2 champions. Michael Sandstad out with a very serious crash, and also Jan Kersipou, the sprinter who won a stage of the race at Rouen. He's also gone home now. Sandstad, as I said, he's got 8 broken ribs. They're very concerned about damage to his throat because he couldn't get his breathing properly. He's got a suspected broken collarbone as well. They got him off the mountain by helicopter very quickly to hospital, and the doctors of the Tour did visit him in hospital this morning before the race started, and he'd passed a very, very comfortable night, and they were hopeful that soon he will be well on the road to recovery, which is good news.
There were a lot of nasty crashes on the road yesterday, and a lot of them by riders taking risks. But I think one of the funniest ones was Brad McGee, because he actually admitted afterwards that the crash was completely and utterly his own fault. He'd looked over his shoulder going into a corner to see the position of the motorbike behind him, and he lost control coming out of the corner and went into a barbed wire fence. And his quote afterwards was quite funny, because he said he felt as if he was strung up in that fence like a stuffed kangaroo.
Well, the race pounding through the woods here, thankful for the shade from the trees. And nobody helping, nobody wanting to get in the way of this train, in full control of the Tour de France today. Tomorrow it's an undulating route, not flat by any means, but hopefully they'll take it a little bit easier. This is Miguel Martinez, who was in the breakaway, is now back at the end of the peloton, checking out for food for the rest of the ride home. Still a fair way to go, but it's not the distance, it's routine, the distance for these riders. It's the two climbs which are ahead of them which will make them freak out, because the last climb today, just wait until you see the public waiting on the climb at the Plateau de Bailly, because it is a fantastic crowd, and it's only the second time the Tour has arrived here. Goodness knows how we're all going to get off the mountain tonight.
Could be a long drive down to the hotel, I would expect. Yeah. But right now, the main field are around about 2 kilometers from the town of Massat, which will put them right at the foot of the next climb of the day, and that's the penultimate climb, the Col de Port.
58 kilometers to go and counting. Back with more coverage of Stage 12 of the Tour de France. But first, we invite you to surf on over to olntv.com. Here's our question of the day. Who's the biggest threat to Lance right now? Is it Balaki, Tyler Hamilton, Rumsas, Botero, Gonzalez de Galdiano? How about nobody? We'd like to know what you think. And then don't forget, on Monday, July 22nd, you can chat with Phil and Paul. I had a quick update on the peloton, which has now caught Eddie Mazzolini, and the peloton is about 5 minutes behind the trio of Nozal, Jalabert, and Dufaux. So there's our update. U.S. Postal still in control of the peloton. You see Lance in the yellow jersey. Let's go back to Phil and Paul.
It's a long and lonely ride for US Postal, no help at all, but you know, they have ridden so far a very sensible Tour de France. They all rode exceptionally hard in the opening prologue time trial around the city of Luxembourg. After that, they rallied into the formation that they needed to do a good ride in the team time trial, but they were never really called upon to dig deep into their reserves over the first 10 days of this Tour de France. But right now they are coming into their own, and the team has been very sensible in conserving their energy, because at the end of the day, you must never forget when you come to the Tour de France that it's a 3-week bike race. It's a race that you have to be competitive in the last week, and we saw that previously with Lance Armstrong when he crumbled on what was almost the last climb of the Tour de France a couple of years ago, the Col de Jouplan. He recovered pretty smartishly, that's for sure, but you do have to remember that the race really goes right the way up to the Champs-Élysées in Paris.
Well, tight fit through the town, and another beautiful Pyrenean town it is. Sharp left at the church, follow the yellow arrows, and you'll come out at the Plateau de Bailly. But that is still 55 kilometers in front. And these boys are going to keep just tempo riding and hold this race together. If anybody wants to take them on, they're welcome. That's the attitude now. As we see the main field coming up. They've just now started the climb here, the main field, and there's the time gap of 5 minutes 3 seconds. They've now started the climb of the Col de Port, which puts them 44 kilometers from the finish at the top. So they're now 56 kilometers to go here today, and it is the blue jersey of Lance Armstrong who are driving the main field, while we cut back now to the three leaders who have headed this race up really since coming together on the climb of the Col de Mont. A long time out in front now, and Laurent Jalabert is the rider who is the new leader in the King of the Mountains, riding so well. He's being trailed by Isidro Nozal, a teammate of Jashiba Balaka, who is now second overall. And the other man here is Laurent Dufaux of Switzerland. And, you know, Paul, he is a man who is sort of, well, he's in his twilight years, but he seems to have found himself again, because he announced his retirement, and now he's back in the racing scene.
He's a man who's always been a great hopeful for a high place in the overall standings at the Tour de France for Switzerland, and I think, in fact, he has had a 4th place finish. But towards the end of his career, he's riding a much more relaxed approach to the Tour de France, and right now he really is doing an exceptional performance on these roads of the Pyrenees this afternoon. This is a long climb, Phil, at 12.6 kilometers. It isn't a huge difference in height because it starts off at 600 meters and goes up to 1249 meters, but it is once again the heat that is over the Tour de France at the moment, which is making all of these climbs just so very difficult. When the heat comes down like this, it also seems to steal all of the oxygen out of the air for the riders.
Well, I'll tell you what, in the green jersey competition, it's now taken a back seat. We've got deep into the Pyrenees today, but at the start today, the Australian Robbie McEwen, who lost his green jersey to Eric Zabel after wearing it for a day, was out with a vengeance early on. He won the sprint and 6 points for that competition at the start of the day. Eric Zabel, his main rival, was second, and Sir Robbie clawed back 2 of the 3 points he is behind in that competition, while Stuart O'Grady hasn't given up hope either, because he's come through in third place there. That's a 3-man battle that will be decided maybe as it was last year in the very last sprint in Paris. This is David Echevarria. Now, he was one of the early attackers today, way out at the start of the day on the Col de Mont, and just like he was yesterday, in fact, but it looks like he's paid the price again.
Well, he doesn't have to worry too much, because just a little way behind him, he's got his namesake as well, who was dropped just a few moments ago, Unai Echevarria as well. So surprising to see David drop like this in the mountains. He wanted to show himself off to the mainly Basque crowd, which is here at the top of this huge mountain here, the Plateau de Bay. But you can get a chance here, looking down on the overall peloton there, Phil, that this really is turning out to be once again a difficult stage for the main field. This is Cabello going off the back as well, the man who just a few moments early we saw going into the team cars to get drinks for his teammates. He's mainly renowned as being an attacking rider over the flat stages, so he's really on a mission to survive this afternoon stage and just get to the finish inside the time limit now.
He won a stage of the Tour de France when he visited Great Britain. I think it was in Portsmouth where he sprinted over the line as winner of that stage. As he now feels the pressure of the day. We're on the lower slopes for the peloton of the 12-kilometer climb of the Col de Port. Remember, we've got 3 leaders, but they are 5 minutes ahead of the field at the moment as we look at Miguel Martinez hanging on.
And we continue the climb of Col de Port. 53 kilometers to go to the finish here at Plateau de Bay. And how about this? It took a while, but we finally have a double winner. Guess who? Lance Armstrong. Bill Patrick back with you. Stage 12 continues. A blistering day, a brutal stage. Stage 12. There's Stuart O'Grady at the back of the peloton, riding for Crédit Agricole, of course. Well, when Lance won yesterday's stage 11, he took another lead. He is now, well, look at it, 13 career stage victories for Lance, as opposed to 12 for Eric Zabel, the man who seemingly wins the green jersey every year. So he takes the lead among active riders in the Tour de France field, 13 to 12. Of course, Zabel has a great chance to even things up tomorrow, stage 13. And there is Lance. He and U.S. Postal doing a fine job again today, controlling that peloton. They are now about 5 minutes behind our leaders.
Up in the front here now, George Hincapie for US Postal. There's the official time gap at 5 minutes, 7 seconds. Everybody willing to help out at the front for Lance Armstrong. You won't see Lance Armstrong up here. They'll protect him just like they mother hen them as they make their way towards the finish. Armstrong apparently was planning a big attack on the Plateau de Bay today, except he got the race lead yesterday, which he really didn't expect. Now he might not plan to attack at all. I think he'll watch and see if Bolocki wants to stretch his legs.
Well, I think he was a bit surprised yesterday to see the time gaps appearing. There he is, sitting up there, just opening his shirt. But you know, it is rather an emotional day for Lance Armstrong as well today, Phil, because going through this part of the Pyrenees, he always reminds himself of what happened in 1995 when Fabio Casatelli passed away on the descent of one of the earlier climbs we went over, the Col de Porte d'Aspet. And in fact, normally I would think if the race hadn't been on in full earnest, many of the riders would have stopped at the special monument for Fabio Casatelli just to salute their departed hero. But the organisation, Jean-Marie Leblanc and Bernard Hinault, they stopped there to pay their respects to the man who left his life on the sides of the road at the Tour de France in 1995. And Lance always seems to try and do something very special whenever he comes down to this area, and I'm quite sure in the back of his mind, as in the back of the mind of Bernard Hinault, these guys know that it's a very emotional day.
A magnificent steel it is too on the Porte d'Aspet. Many cyclists of course seek it out as they ride their bikes as tourists within this region, and there are plenty of those around today. A lot of them here. We are meeting Americans, South Africans, Australians, English riders, all enjoying the Tour de France for real. But at least they do say they like to watch it on the television, because at least they know what's going on the whole route and not just when it goes past them. So that's nice to know. Still back at the bus here is Stuart O'Grady, gone for a shower by the look of it, as he continues the slopes of the Col de Porte, the beauty of the Pyrenees in what is, we've had a consensus of opinion here, one of the nicest days we've ever had in the Pyrenees. It's very, very hot. Visibility is a long, long, long way.
And a bit further than that, probably.
And a bit further than that, absolutely.
I have to say, Phil, I think it is the clearest day I've ever seen here in the Pyrenees. They are remarkable mountains, the Pyrenees, because the weather can change in the space of 24 hours, from being this 35 degrees Celsius, 100 degree Fahrenheit heat, to going to be completely impossible to see beyond the end of your handlebars, with the clouds and the cold coming down very rapidly indeed. But fortunately for us today, it is a magnificent backdrop for what is going to be a real showdown when we come to the final climb of the day. The three leaders right now are still holding on a pretty serious advantage at 5 minutes and 10 seconds, and if they go to the bottom of the final climb of the day, then certainly the victory will go to one of these riders who are on the lead at the moment. And maybe the man they will need to watch out for is the man at the back, Isidro Norzal, because he has done hardly anything at all this afternoon to encourage the success of this breakaway.
No, which is his right, as he has the rider in second place in the race. Why carry away somebody as dangerous as Laurent Jalabert into a potential second place, if not the race lead? So his job is to follow. Gets a chance though, he might try to attack and go away for the stage win. That would be a remarkable achievement for him. It's his first Tour de France. He's only a young rider and led in the white jersey young rider competition for quite a while. Currently he's in 20th place overall and is 8 minutes off the race lead. As we swing back now to the workhorses of the peloton, US Postal.
Well, as Paul just noted, today's stage passed by the monument to Lance's former teammate, Fabio Casatelli, who died after a crash descending the Porte d'Aspet back in 1995. We should also tell you that yesterday's win for Lance came on the 7th anniversary of that tragic day. We'll be right back. 30 Eastern and Pacific. There's Stuart O'Grady. We continue on the road to Plateau de Bay as they make their way up the Col de Porte. It's a Category 2 climb, not terribly steep, but try telling that to these guys who've already gone 150 kilometers. Let's go back to Phil and Paul.
So Stuart O'Grady losing a little bit of ground at the moment, but I think just measuring his pace. In fact, he's pedaling back as I speak.
Well, O'Grady's a very experienced bike rider, and he will be riding well within himself. In fact, if you can just see the black band across his chest there, that's his heart rate monitor, and that is very important for Stuart O'Grady, more than maybe any of the other bike riders in the Tour de France, because of that slight heart problem which he showed he had a few days ago on the stage to Avranches. But in fact, O'Grady had to undergo a special health test, which was obliged to him by the UCI, the International Cycling Union, just on the rest day, before they would allow him back into the race. The governing body were a little bit worried about the fact that that illness that he has may well manifest itself later on in the Tour de France. But he passed that test with flying colours.
He did, and he got his medical release from the hospital in Bordeaux to continue in the Tour de France. So all is well. Mum back home in South Australia, Faye, and Dad Brian needn't worry too much about that. as we're looking now at a teammate here going off as well. He's going to be able to talk to Jens Voigt in a minute, because Jens has his ups and downs on the Pyrenees this year. He fell heavily, as you can see, yesterday. He remounted. He's had a flat tyre earlier today, but he got back to the group. So he's having a rough old ride at the moment, but I think you can say that about the whole of the Crédit Agricole team. They've had nothing but bad luck all year. It's continued in the Tour de France. He's Danilo Hondo also slipping off the back at the moment, champion of Germany. And earlier on, we caught sight of Christophe Moreau having a punch-up with Carlos Sastre. And as everybody saw it on television, and that's a Crédit Agricole rider, by the way, Moreau, we wait and see what the referees decide, because they usually are very, very strict on fights amongst riders, and the only sanction is disqualification from the race. So let's hope they didn't see it as quite that serious.
Well, it's a bit unfair as well for the riders, because nowadays there are so many cameras around the bike race that you can hardly get away with anything at all. Maybe the judges will look at that and give a penalty to Christophe Moreau, who we're looking at right now in the green and white jersey at the front. Towards the end of the day, it was a nasty little punch-up, and things can get quite heated, especially on days like this when it's a hard day in the saddle. The temperature comes way up there, and nerves just get a little frayed. There in the pink jersey, you can see Yoshiba Balocchi. He's in second place in the overall standings. There is Massimiliano Lelli, and this is the rear end of the main field. Anthony Morin, he's being left behind right now to just try and get to the finish as best as he can. Bear in mind, Phil, that these guys have been racing in these conditions now for over 145 kilometers, and it's been a seriously hot day in the valley roads.
Yes, this is the finest diet in the world, by the way, is riding a bike in these conditions. You don't need any pills to lose weight. Just simply get on your bike and let the sun do the rest. These boys weigh in at such light weights after racing some 40 to 50,000 kilometers in a season, including their training. Mark Wouters slipping off the back there. He held the race lead for one day, I think it was, last year. He got the race lead into Antwerp, which is a lovely result for him, because Antwerp's in Belgium, and that's where he comes from. There's the Breton flag, where we were for half of the tour over the northern part of France. We flew down from Brittany down to the start in Bordeaux of the resumption of the race in Bazas the other day. These are the three leaders now. We hadn't seen them for a while, and they are hanging on to a lead. The last check we got, it was just over 5 minutes, and they are 47 kilometers to go now. That's just on 30 miles of racing, but they've got the rest of the climb here up the Col de Port. They've got the 16 kilometers of the final climb of the Plateau de Bailly, and so there's not much flat in that 47 kilometers, I'm afraid.
Well, as far as US Postal are concerned, they're not too worried about putting the pressure on and chasing these guys down. This is Giuseppe Guerini at the back. Now, that's a bit of a surprise, because Guerini, let's not forget, won himself a stage at the Alpe d'Huez a few years ago. So to see a climber like him suffering on a mountain slope like this is a bit of a surprise. Miguel Martinez as well, number 126. He's had a hard day out in the saddle, because he was in one of the early breakaways that got clear before we went to the Col de Monte. And he's learning the hard way just how tough the road side of the sport is, because this man is a brilliant mountain biker, Olympic champion in Sydney, and he will hope to conserve that title in 2004.
Looks like his dad now with that close-up. His dad, Miguel Martinez, and his father, who did so well, won the King of the Mountains in the old days. And Mario Martinez was a super bike rider, but he suffered just like his son. Now his son knows how his dad must have felt as he raced to that King of the Mountains title in the Tour de France. It's the first tour for Miguel. Looking at the peloton, being led as always by US Postal, but the gap is still more than 5 minutes as we speak, and Jalabert still up front.
Another reminder, folks, included in our coverage today, a commercial-free half hour. That's coming up later, and it's well worth waiting for, because it will include the finish for the stage winner. Stay with us. Welcome back. I promise we'll get back to this grueling stage just as soon as we possibly can. But first, since driving up this ascent this morning, I've been trying to come up with the right words to describe just how tough this climb is. Let's see, I've used the words inhuman, monstrous, devilish, but somehow they all seem to fall short. I don't know. Maybe Bob Roll can help.
As grisly and savage as the first stage in the Pyrenees is to La Mongie, the stage to the Plateau de Bay is 10 times harder. It's the most difficult stage in this Tour de France and gives the best opportunity for the strongest man to distance his rivals. It is absolutely grim with 5 categorized climbs and then nearly 20 Ks into the heavens to finish at the Plateau de Bay. Cycling, unlike any other sport, rewards the man most capable and most willing to accept the burden of suffering. The best preparation that any man can have is to feel the fetid breath of death itself breathing down your neck. There's only one man that fits that description in this race, Lance Armstrong.
Bob, thank you so much. Trust me, folks, you've got to see this climb in person to truly appreciate it. But since obviously you can't do that right now, let's do the next best thing and get back to it on television.
So the peloton slowly but surely grinding the way up the Col de Port. At the last time check we've got, it's 4 minutes 38 seconds on these 3 riders. They're much nearer the summit now, and Jalabert itching to get up here and grab the points, because he's already moved into the lead in the King of the Mountains today. A polka dot jersey awaits him at the finish, but more points he gets now, the less he'll have to do when we go to the Alps next week.
Well, Jalabert looks very comfortable on today's stage, Phil, which is quite remarkable when you think of the effort that he had to put in yesterday. This climb is a climb of 12.6 kilometers. It's not really all that steep. It's an average gradient of 4.9%, but at the summit, these riders are at 1,250 meters, which is pretty close to 5,000 feet in altitude. So quite a long, hard day in the saddle, and this is the 4th climb of the day these riders have had to drag themselves over, but it's the last one of the day, the Plateau de Bay, which is going to make the absolute big difference.
Well, very shortly he's going to see 1 kilometer to the summit. He's not too far away from it now. I don't think Nozell will do anything at the back. He's not done anything all day, but I don't think he'll try to steal any points off Jalabert, because that won't go down too well. He'll just sit there at the back and he'll just try and keep out of the way. At the moment, Jalabert has 122 points to Patrice Algon's 57 and David Etcheverry's 52. The Dufault is climbing into the scene. He's 4th with 51. But I must say that at the moment, on the second category climb, he's got another 20 waiting for him if he can win.
I think he'll win. I think, don't forget, Laurent Jalabert in the early part of his career was an absolutely superb sprinter. And if anybody tries to get close to him, he can blow them away. They've all been working very hard since the start of today's stage. And Jalabert is the man who's setting the majority of the tempo on the frontier. I don't think any of these men are thinking in the back of their minds that they want to try and get points in the King of the Mountains competition. Jalabert wants to get maximum points, and he wants to win this stage as well because of yesterday's attack. He feels today he deserves the win, and there's confirmation. No challenge at all.
That's the way it should be. If you do all the work, you take home the dinner. And over the top goes Laurent Jalabert, followed by Laurent Dufault, followed by the ticket collector at the back today, Isidro Nozal. And in fact, you've got to remember, this guy is a very young rider, one of the young riders of the race, and he's doing an outstanding performance in his first Tour de France. He would, I'm quite sure, help out if he wasn't riding under orders from the team not to help out, because there's a danger Jalabert could finish this race today 5 minutes ahead, and that would bring another man into play.
Well, the thing is, his team manager, Isidro Nozal's team manager, knows Laurent Jalabert very well, because Manolo Sainz was Laurent Jalabert's team manager for many years. And there must have been something very strange went on between them as they separated towards the end of a couple of years ago, because neither of them has ever spoken about the reason why Jalabert left the team, or the reason why Manolo Sainz, in fact, allowed him to leave after being such a successful bike rider for Team Once. And even just recently I read an article about Manolo Sainz and asked why there'd been the separation. He said, "I respect the man to absolute perfection, but I cannot say what went on between us."
Well, it's amazing. We'll find out one day, I'm sure. Well, when we do, we'll tell you.
We'll keep a close eye on that one to see how it develops. This is the descent where the riders now should not lose any of their advantage at all. They went over the top there, you see, with still a time advantage of 4 minutes 53 seconds. This descent is approximately 17 kilometers long, so there should be no problem at all. Those men at the front will go off this mountain at an average speed of between 50 and 60 miles an hour, while meantime in the main field there's no need at all for these men to lift up the pacemaking, because none of those men in front, Nozal, Jalabert or Dufault, are really of any threat at all to Lance Armstrong's lead.
Floyd Landis setting the pace at the front. Axel Merckx off to the left of our picture there. It'll be a little while yet before they cross over the top. I would think about another 3 minutes or so.
So Laurent Jalabert, certainly the king of the mountains right now, looking to take that polka dot jersey away from Patrice Elgan. Jaja leads by 85 points at the moment. Certainly not riding like a 33-year-old guy who's going to retire this year. Welcome back on this gorgeous day in the Pyrenees as we see some riders looking for mountain points. 40K to go to Plateau de Bay, where we are, the finish of stage 12. And I've got some bad news, folks, for the rest of the field. Since returning in 1999, Lance Armstrong, our leader, has never lost the yellow jersey after attaining it in the mountains. He did so yesterday. He is firmly in control. Let's go back to Phil and Paul.
Well, as they come together, Carlos Sastre was the rider taking on Richard Virenque, the man that had the boxing gloves on a bit earlier when he was fighting with Christophe Moreau. But he's just joined Richard Virenque on the descent of the Col de Porte. Virenque goes over in 4th place, and the gap very manageable at just on 4 3/4 minutes to the leaders of the Tour today on the road. And just to remind you that Laurent Jalabert out front started the day 5 minutes and 53 seconds behind Lance Armstrong. He's currently clawed back 4 minutes 39 of them, and there is a bonus for the win as well, so it's very close to him taking the race lead if it survives, but I somehow don't think so.
Well, nobody's taking any risks on this descent right now because everyone knows exactly what's in store for them. The Plateau de Bay has been, the Tour de France has been there once before. That was in 1998, but it is a climb that many of the riders know very well, Phil, because a famous race here called the Route du Sud comes here very often. Armstrong staying near the front end of the main field, always surrounded by the blue train US Postal Service, his teammates doing a superb job looking after him, keeping him at the front of this main peloton. They ride a lonely race right now because they don't have that many people who are able to come up alongside and have a chat with them. And Armstrong is completely focused on the job in hand. He knows that the attacks will come on the final climb of the day, but he also knows that his men are in absolute tip-top condition right now. Now it looks like there's a move coming off the front here. Axel Merckx is in 2nd position there, and it seems as if one of the Domo Farm Freaks riders wants to try and launch himself off the front. Now this is a good move by Axel Merckx, and he could get himself a bit of an advantage before we get to the bottom.
Well, this is going to give Dad Eddie something to talk about, Paul, as he starts to go. Axel Merckx, stage winner in the past.
Merckx is in 2nd place, Virenque is in 4th or 5th, Carlos Sastre is there as well, and looking over their shoulders they can see they've actually opened up the gap on the US Postal Service men. And I have a feeling that there's no real need to chase these guys either, because also just nicking into that group is Andrea Piron. There you can get a chance to see as they go around one of these unbelievable hairpin bends that those 5 men have opened up themselves a gap of around about 12 seconds over the main field, which currently is being still led, as it has been for the whole of today's stage, by the team of Lance Armstrong US Postal.
Merckx's best finish, 10th in the Tour de France, which he did his first Tour de France, funny, 1998. He's rather struggled since then. He got 22nd last year. Now the field descending the Col de Porte. Time to have a nice deep breath and enjoy the descent, but you must not relax your concentration. Yesterday a number of riders crashed on the Col de Soulor. Jonathan Vaughters of the United States crashed and went out. Michael Sandstad, the champion of Denmark, he crashed, broke 8 ribs and went to hospital by helicopter, so obviously he was out. Jan Kursipuu was dropped and eliminated, or at least gave up. He wasn't eliminated, he stopped on the roadside. Other riders who crashed and continued, though, the most remarkable one, I think, was Bradley McGee. I think McGee was on the ride of his life yesterday, crossing the gap to the leaders. Completely made a mistake. He looked over his shoulder at a motorbike, lost his line on a corner, and had a terribly heavy fall which tore his jersey to shreds. And so the Sydney sider was in all sorts of bother there, but he was at least man enough to say it was my fault, and most riders would always blame somebody else.
Well, it's so easy to do because you're going downhill so fast, and all you have to do is just look over your shoulder for a fraction, and then you can completely lose your line in the corner. But he did manage to finish the day and survived quite admirably, and he's doing a good ride today on the roads of the Tour de France. And I have to take my hat off to him because he's hoping after this year's tour to go to Manchester and ride the Commonwealth Games on the track, and that's a completely different effort to what he's going through right now, because this is the toughest thing to do.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Well, just to give you one more idea of how monstrous this stage can be, take a look at the profile again. They've already survived 2 Category 1 and 2 Category 2 climbs, still with 37 kilometers to go. But what looms ahead is off the scale. The Plateau de Bay, 16 kilometers, a nearly 8% pitch. It is sheer hell. And we are back. A look at our leaders. 33 kilometers to go as they continue their descent. And stage 12 it is as they work their way toward Plateau de Bay. By the way, if you missed any part of this stage or you're concerned about stage results at all, can't get to a TV, well, how about this? Pretty cool. Get stage results delivered right to your cell phone every day. Go to olmtv.com and sign up now. Sponsored by Iris Me. Now let's head back to Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen on this blistering hot day.
Good pacemaking by Laurent Dufaux here, not looking like a man who's weakening at all. We just do not know how Nozal is going, because he sat at the back ever since he joined the leaders in defense of Joshiba Bolocki back in the field along with Lance.
Well, it'll be interesting to see just exactly how he does perform, but I would think if he tries to attack on the early slopes, you will see a very angry Laurent Jalabert pulling him back into the fold quite quickly. In fact, getting a quick glimpse here, I think it may well be Thomas Konechny who's gone across here with Axel Merckx. A little bit further back is Richard Virenque, but he's having a hard time staying in contact. And further back, having been left behind by this incredible descent of Axel Merckx, is Andrea Perron and Carlos Sastre.
Well, this is Merckx, the little sleeve cuffs there showing the stripes of the Belgian flag, indicating a past champion of his country at the sport of cycling. He was in fact a very good footballer at the high level too, but chose cycling as his #1 sport, and the football being the type we play in Britain rather than the type one plays in America with the rather odd shaped ball. As we continue on the descent here now, this is the peloton and a little group trying to get away. They won't chase it down by US Postal. It doesn't serve to give them any advantage to chase down Merckx and the breakaway at the moment. Interesting move though. Carlos Sastre is in there. He's a good rider and is the #3 on the team behind Tyler Hamilton and Laurent Jalabert, currently lying in 19th place in the overall classification too.
Well, it's probably an ideal time to try and slip away from what has been a very attentive US Postal Service on the front end of the main field. That's where we're heading to right now. This is the next small town the riders will go through. This is Badayac-et-Agnon. Very shortly they will then head into the slightly larger town of Tarascon-sur-Ariège, and then there's a long drag up through the valley for the riders as they head towards Les Cabanes, and it's from Les Cabanes that the road tips right the way up to the skies for 16 kilometers or 10 miles, and that's going to be a real hard slog up to the finish line here.
Yes, enjoy the sight of the peloton in the Tour de France. It won't be there for very much longer. A lot of riders here at the moment, and they're still coming back. As they slip off the back, they do rejoin on the descent. They take a little bit more risk than the others to latch back on, knowing they'll probably be uncoupled again on the last climb, but that's not important. They can then ride up to the finishing line, losing only time, but not the day to fight again, because they'll beat the elimination time. Lance Armstrong right at the back of the 9 riders on his team, including himself. 11 teams still have 9 men in this year's Tour de France, which is quite unusual at this stage of the race, and 2 teams have only 7 left. The Once team gathering force now, all of their riders gathering out their man, Joshiba Bolocki in the wake of US Postal. So the big battle is about to begin. They have one man up the road in Isidro Nozal, who I think will try to attack and go alone to the finish, but not yet. Here we are, back with the leaders now. Been another very quick race today. They've been keeping the average speed up. 4 minutes 15 seconds, the latest check, over the two riders who are chasing behind.
I have a feeling that other group of three, Perron, Sastre and Virenque, have actually been brought back into the main field. So the race situation just now is the three leaders chased by Konechny and Axel Merckx, and then the whole of the main field charging down. And it was interesting to note a quick glimpse as we looked at the riders making up that peloton still contain the green jersey of Eric Zabel. Zabel riding an excellent race this year, getting himself over some very difficult mountains today, and still holding on to his green jersey points competition by a single point from Robbie McEwen. That's a story to follow.
All the way to the finish. There's the latest, 4.7 for the chasers, 4.40. These are the two chasers here now, and 4.40 to the main field. So Axel Merckx is persisting and just trying to keep the pressure on here with Konechny. And nice to see a two-man team time trial at this stage of the Tour de France.
Keep this in mind as they approach Plateau de Bay, folks. It is a very, very tough climb. But there are 4 mountains in the Alps that are even tougher, including 3 on stage 16. And welcome back, everybody. Look at the chasers. 27K to go to the finish line. Stage 12, Plateau de Bay, is where we are. What happened yesterday in stage 11? Well, here's one way to look at it. Some of the guys who have become contenders, Roberto Harris, who did such a great job helping Lance over the finish line, moved from 48th to 14th overall by finishing 3rd. Francisco Mancebo up to 9th from 22nd. Sevilla made a big move. Basso, Kovalev. We'll call them our contenders. But what about the pretenders? The riders who fell in stage 11. Honchar from 4th to 10th. Perron from 6th to 18th. And how about Stuart O'Grady? He's a sprinter. We'll give him a break, but he did a free fall, finishing in 113th yesterday. He fell from 8th to 64th, so that can happen in a hurry, as we have seen. U.S. Postal doing what they can again today. Will it come down to Lance against the world at the end of stage 12?
Looking at Ekimov there as he stretches his back. So they've caught Axel Merckx. This is the face of Thomas Konechny, riding his first Tour de France, Czech Republic rider. He's sticking to his guns. He was with Axel Merckx, but I think he should look over his shoulder, because they're right there behind him, about 10 seconds, I would say, as he now descends into the town of Tarascon. We've seen the leaders, or Tarascon rather, as we've seen the leaders go through there. The watches will be running. 4 minutes 19, the latest check. It might be enough, although we've seen the climb, and it is very, very hard indeed today. There'll be plenty of people to shout for Laurent Jalabert. There'll be plenty of people, too, to shout for Nozell, because the Spanish rider will have a lot of support on this climb.
In fact, it depends really on the way the other riders in the group decide to ride this final climb here, Phil, because the reason is that all of the attacks are expected to come from the Spanish riders. The man we're looking at there, Thomas Konechny, is caught in no man's land. The race situation, as we look at the Plateau de Bay in the distance where the riders are heading to, is 3 leaders: Isidro Nozal of Team Once, Laurent Jalabert of France, who is now the new leader in the King of the Mountains competition, and Laurent Dufaux of Switzerland, and their advantage around about 4.5 minutes over the main field. I don't think Armstrong is too worried at all about chasing down Laurent Jalabert, and he has a mutual respect for the man who he regards as a great champion. So he will just allow his team to set a nice steady tempo on the front end of the main field, and it's whether or not the other riders like Botero, like Roberto Laiseca, and some of the other Spanish climbers decide to go onto the attack as to whether or not the 3 leaders will survive the day.
I think Armstrong will take his troops onto the mountain and just tell them to hold their speed if they can, for as long as they can. And then he'll check over his shoulder and see just how many have managed to match the pace, and then he'll decide what to do. And if it means they pick up the 3 leaders, that is what will happen. And if it doesn't, he won't worry either. because he will keep his lead in the Tour de France, and that he will certainly take then to the Battle of Mont Ventoux on Sunday, the Giant of Provence, which I know many riders in this race really do fear. But we're looking at the US Postal Boys now, steaming into this very nice little town of Tarascon, as they will then cross a valley road with no ripples on it really into the town of Les Cabanes, and then it all changes. They go up the mountain. The police, by the way, took the decision today to close the approach to the finish an hour and a half ahead of planned schedules, because the traffic they felt was getting a little bit too much, and the crowds up here are enormous, and they're enjoying a magnificent day. You've got to watch the sun up here on the mountain top, because it really does burn. Here we are looking now at the youngster Nozal, doing the ride of his life. Even if he hasn't helped the breakaway today, he's still in a great position to win this stage.
Keep these names in mind and these numbers. Lance Armstrong led Joseba Balaki by 1:12 coming in, and Igor Gonzalez de Galdeano by 1:48 coming into stage 12. Those are the men he's most concerned about. Welcome back with about 20 kilometers to go to the finish. The peloton has caught Tomas Konechny, so now it's 3 against the world once again. Another reminder coming up, included in our coverage today, a commercial-free half hour that's coming up later, and it's worth waiting for. It will include the finish for the stage winner today.
To win. Underneath the banner, 20 kilometers to go now. Just 20 kilometers, 12 miles. We're on the outskirts of the town of Bouin, and very shortly they will be heading through Saint-Sat and then into Les Cabanes, and it's there where the climb starts. 4 kilometers before they start the climb. And this, we're looking down here at one of the glorious rivers. This will be the river Ariège, coursing through from, it rises in the Pyrenees and then goes out to the ocean, and it must look particularly cool to the riders today.
I tell you, on a day like this, when you've been in the saddle since just around about 10 minutes to 11 o'clock this morning, and we're now coming up to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that river of the Ariège looks very beckoning, I would say, to 1 or 2 bike riders. It'd be quite nice to put your feet into that right now, but unfortunately they still have to do 20 kilometers of today's stage, and 16 of those kilometers, Phil, are uphill to the summit here at the Plateau de Bay. An unbelievable ascent to 1,780 meters above sea level.
All accomplished in just 16 kilometers of climbing. We're going deep into the valley now. There's no way down this mountain tonight for everybody who's gone up it except the same way, which is going to mean we are going to be in one huge traffic jam. There's plenty of helicopters coming in at the moment. If we could just get a lift on one of those, Paul, that would be nice. That's the way Lance Armstrong will go off the mountain tonight, because the Tour de France does have a rule, which they actually issued a communique during the Tour, that the riders must only leave the mountain in their team cars and not by any other means, so they all get equally balanced. But as we look at the field now, that bunch gone down in size a little bit, hasn't it? From 177 riders down to what looks to be about 40. There's one of our helicopters overseeing the race. We've got at least half a dozen sat just outside our commentary box here, waiting to go down and show the VIPs, the Tour de France, on the slopes of the Plateau de Bay. And the bunch here now know that D-Day is just up the hill there and getting themselves ready for the ascent. All of the US Postal, who have worked all day at the front here for their man in yellow, will shortly try to launch him on the attack.
Well, all the big names, Phil, have started to queue up right now onto the tail of this man in the yellow jersey, Lance Armstrong. There is Heras, but not too far behind is Joseba Beloki.
180 kilometers down, 19 to go in stage 12, which means just 3 kilometers before the beginning of the end, the ascent to Plateau de Bay. Stay with us. We are back. Look at our leaders. Can they hang on, or will they be caught by the peloton led by Lance and the boys? I don't know. Here's another question. We asked you earlier, our website question on olntv.com. Who's the biggest threat to Lance Armstrong? Well, 51% of you thought it's Joseba Beloki, but I love this. 37% of you said nobody. It's all over. Lance will win again this year. Well, we'll see. Also, here's your chance to chat live on the web with Phil and Paul. It comes your way Monday, July 22nd, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Live, a web chat with our guys on OLNTV.com. A rare opportunity indeed.
These three riders still enjoying the late afternoon sun here in France. It's just 10 minutes past 4 local time. And they've still got the hottest stretch of road ahead of them. The gap is still coming down to 3:17 now for Laurent Jalabert on the front. He's in virtually identically the same situation he was yesterday, except he's got a couple of people to help him out this time. Les Cabanes, that's the town where they start the climb to the Plateau de Baille. It's a ski station, it's a winter sports station, but occasionally it's a stop off for the Tour de France. And in fact, this will be only the second time we've been here in the Tour de France. 1998, Marco Pantani rode away and won by a minute and a half at the top. Now just look at the crowd here, because this crowd will guide the Tour de France to its summit today. There are thousands of people on this road.
Well, this race has been here many times before. It's a long ascent, Phil, 15.9 kilometers. The average gradient is 7.8%. But I tell you one thing, I think the first few kilometers are around about 10 or 12%. At the summit, it's 1,780 meters in altitude. And in fact, the Tour de France may have only been here once before, but the race in the run-up to the Tour de France, the Route du Sud, uses this on many occasions. And we had a funny little chat this morning with Eric Brookink, a man who has raced up here in the Tour of Spain, and he said he thought it was an easy climb.
Yes, well, Paul went up and said, I'm glad I'm no longer cycling, Eric, aren't you? He says, no, I love this climb. So that was the end of that conversation, really. In fact, Levi Leipheimer, the American leader of the Dutch Rabobank team in the event, he won the time trial up here in the Route du Sud just before this race started, and as a consequence won the Route du Sud itself. And let's hope he can accelerate a bit again today when he gets onto the slopes. We're with the leaders now. They've just started the lower slopes of the Plateau de Baille, and it gets steeper.
This is not going to be fun for the guys in the main field, all these three leaders right now. And just to put it all into perspective, they will be riding uphill from now for the next 40 to 45 minutes. And some of the guys like me behind, they will probably be riding up this climb for pretty close to 1 hour.
And in my case 2.5, but even so, as these three now settle in to their final challenge of the Pyrenees today, there are a couple of hills tomorrow very early on as they run away from the Pyrenees, which should not be decisive. So this is the major hill of the Pyrenees in this year's Tour de France. There's the peloton. I never cease to amaze at the speed these riders can pedal as they're going onto a climb as steep as the one we're about to go up, and driven on by the US Postal Service team of Lance Armstrong. Their job now is very simple. You race to the limit of your ability. When you can't do any more, you get out the way. And that's as simple as that, isn't it, Paul?
Well, it's been a hard day for all of these guys. Padronos there just moving off the front. George Hincapie will ride at the front for as long as he can. Hincapie, the large rider in the front with the white glasses. And as always, everybody welcomes the Tour de France into town. And we're getting ready now for a huge battle on the slopes of the Pyrenees.
Well, as the final ascent begins, we remind you that the Tour de France has finished at Plateau de Baille only once before. In '98, Marco Pantani was the man. He also won the Giro d'Italia that year, in addition to the Tour de France. Astonishing. Oh, the battle has really been joined now. That's Eric Zabel at the back of the peloton, which has now closed the gap to about 2.5 minutes. But ONCE and US Postal are now neck and neck at the head of that peloton. This is going to be good. Phil and Paul.
Well, we are now looking at the riders at the back of what was left of the peloton on the lower slopes of the Plateau de Baille, as we now see some riders slipping off. I just caught a glimpse there of Abraham Olano, former high finish in the Tour de France. He too is riding his last tour, will retire at the end of the season. Meanwhile, at the front, it looks as though US Postal have lost a number of riders now. They've called on the Spanish element of the team to start turning the pedals a little bit quicker at the front and keep the pace going, although this is Floyd Landis still there.
Well, Floyd Landis has obviously recovered after having a very difficult day yesterday. His first real serious day in the Tour de France mountains, and he's come to the front now having recovered. He dropped down the overall standings yesterday to 70th. These three leaders right now, Phil, have an advantage of 2 minutes and 27 seconds, and here's the move coming from Onse.
Well, Onse have been itching to break away today, and this looks like the first move. Onse have launched an attack, and there are signs here US Postal may be losing control of the race today, which is a shock to us all, I think, because they have only two riders left around Lance Armstrong. I don't see Roberto Heras at the minute, and I've seen Onse suddenly rush to the front, and they sent a rider off the front. It looks like Marcus Serrano.
Well, Armstrong has not panicked at all right now. In fact, I would think Roberto Heras is riding in third or fourth position there, just behind Armstrong. He will wait until the last possible moment. This is Chechu Rubiera, as Lance likes to call him. Jose Luis Rubiera on the front. Heras is there on the left-hand side. Yoshiba Balocchi is very close in the pink jersey. The blue and pink jersey is Raimundas Rumsas. Now, he is very high in the overall standings at fourth place. At the back, there is Laurent Brochard. On the left-hand side there is Dario Frigo. A lot of men are suffering.
Well, a lot of men are suffering, but you'd expect them to on this climb, which its slopes will bite, really bite as we continue up this mountain here. Also dropping off now, Vyacheslav Yekimov. US Postal have lost a man there. He's done his job for the day. We're now beginning to pick our way through the riders who hung on just long enough to see the start of the climb before they cracked on the steep slopes. Bjetseberg, who was in the early breakaway today, one of the 8 men that went, he's now said goodbye to the leaderboard for the day. And it looks like another one of the right. This is Christophe Auriol, has also gone off the back there. No, that's Stefan Burgess. He's cracked on the same team. They're falling away one by one now, and that was Marco Velo from Fassa Bortolo also gone. This is Bobby Julich, the American, who was third when we finished here in 1998 on this climb, and he's now slipped away off the back, and he knows it better than most. So somebody has really stepped on the gas, because the riders have cracked. Inigo Cuesta, very good climber, was the front of those two riders. He's gone. Onse, they brought back Serrano. They look as though they're trying to regain control of the head of the race. There was an element of panic there for a while. Armstrong didn't panic. He's right there with Balocchi locked into his back wheel. And as we go now to an attack by Laurent Jalabert at the front, he knows they are coming. The last time check was 1:50, and he's had to go. Now, is he going to be wiped away in sight of the finish again? But he's going to give it his best shot.
What a tough bike rider this is. He could see the other guys were weakening. He could feel that the time was slowly but surely coming back from the main field to himself, so he decides to go out alone. It'll be a hard call for him to survive, and it depends just exactly how much reserves he's got in those big thighs of his. It's 1:51 back to the yellow jersey group, which is being led by Lance Armstrong's teammate Jose Luis Rubiera.
Well, Jalabert is going to give it his best shot if he can survive. I don't know whether he can, but we'll find out very, very soon now.
As we look at Jaja trying valiantly, gallantly to hang on today. Keep in mind that Lance Armstrong rode conservatively for him yesterday. No big attack, just a steady acceleration. Will we see the same today? Stay with us. And welcome back, everybody. There you see Lance Armstrong in yellow. 11K to go to the finish. How long will that take? This is a very, very steep and arduous climb to the Plateau de Bay. Laurent Jalabert is our leader at the moment, trying to hang on ahead of Isidro Nozal and Laurent Dufaux, and then the peloton, the attacking peloton, right behind them.
There's going to be nobody left on this climb very shortly. There's so many riders getting dropped, they're going to reform in a big bunch, because there is just a battle royale going. This is Christophe Moreau, who's had a good time in the mountains, really, but now he is falling back, and I can't see many riders being left alongside Armstrong again.
It's really a question of elimination. This is the man who leads the bike race, though, wears number 51, Laurent Jalabert. He now has an advantage of around about 1.5 minutes over the group of Lance Armstrong and the yellow jersey. Andrei Kivilev is in the group with Lance Armstrong at the moment, but men are being shelled off the back one at a time as the pressure is being made on the front of that group by Jose Luis Rubiera. You remember just a few moments ago you said it was 12 kilometers to go. Well, it was 12.8. We're only just going inside the 12-kilometer mark for these riders. Jalabert now can only hope to survive on the slopes of this very difficult mountain. 12 kilometers is still going to take him around about 25 to 30 minutes of climbing.
Well, and that is why he's not going to win the stage, I guess, because they are coming. They are saying 20 seconds is the time gap now. There's been such a cracking of the bunch. There is Laurent Dufaux. Ahead of him is the pink jersey of the Once rider who was in the breakaway, Nozal. But if our camera swings around, we're going to see the Armstrong Express coming up this mountain and wiping them out. And it looks like a battle royale between Armstrong again and perhaps Bolocki.
Well, Tyler Hamilton is in the group of Lance Armstrong, but we're hearing over race radio that Levi Leipheimer appears to be in difficulty at the back of that climb alongside Axel Merckx, who we saw attacking on the descent a few moments ago. Laurent Jalabert in exactly the same situation as he was this time last year in the Pyrenees, trying to win himself a great Pyrenean stage, and exactly the same situation as he was in yesterday, on his own at the front of a Pyrenean mountaintop finish, hoping to survive from the onslaught of the return of Lance Armstrong and the US Postal Service team.
So the three leaders are split now by half a minute, and the Armstrong group a little more than 1 minute behind. Concentrating, he knows what's happening behind him now, does Laurent Jalabert. He's just got to stick with his guns because he's got no more strength left to accelerate. Here is what is left of the race here coming up now. Third to the right, that's Raimundus Rumsas, who's having a great tour. The rider in the pink is Bolocki, and it looks, Paul, as though he's only got two teammates with him, Armstrong, here.
He has, but watch out for the man who's actually sitting in the wheels today, Roberto Heras. Maybe today is the day he's going to try and set up the win for his man. Heras there riding on the wheel of Bolocki, who has 21. Levi Leipheimer, 101. He is going out of the back of the group with Axel Merckx. Just in front of him is one of the other riders. And in fact, it looks like Tyler Hamilton might be going off the back as well, because he's the man who wears number 52. So the American challengers to Lance Armstrong's superiority are not able to rival the man from Texas on the slopes of the Pyrenees.
Well, if we get back to Armstrong's route, we're going to find Oscar Sevilla is also now cracking. He is hanging on to the tail of this group. I don't know if our camera will show that, but he is in trouble. We've still got Patero here. He's tucked in there in that green striped jersey, but his young teammate Sevilla is the team captain, and he has gone off the back of that group. We look now, Dufaux and Isidre Nozal, but the main chase is only 30 seconds behind them.
Well, the end is near. Will it be Lance and US Postal once again? One of the moments we've been waiting for. When we come back, it's our Lincoln commercial-free half hour and the finish for the Stage 12 winner. And we are back. There is our leader, for the moment anyway, Laurent Jalabert, as the peloton quickly reels in the rest of the crowd. So what'll it be? Another win for Lance and US Postal? Or will it be someone from Once? Or a long shot, the old man of the mountains, the king of the mountains at the moment, Laurent Jalabert? What will it be? Moments ago, we saw as the youngster, Nozal, was pulled in by the power of the peloton. He had no shot down the stretch. As Lance and US Postal and Once, head of the peloton, make their way up here to Plateau de Bay. Laurent Jalabert trying desperately to hang on his lead, only 30 seconds at the moment. Laurent Dufaux also no shot. He did what he could. He did what he could, but just not good enough. So now for the finish of Stage 12, I'll hand it off to the voices of the Tour de France, Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwen.
Under the banner of 10 kilometers or 6 miles from the finish, more riders are dropped off. It looks as though we've lost here the rider now. Sevilla has gone again. He really has fought well there, Paul, and the Once rider going back there with him, surprisingly, is Jose Acevedo. So Once lose a man. at the front.
Gives you an idea just how difficult this climb is when you see the best climbers in the world popping off the back of the group. This man really has to go deep into his courage this afternoon to try and keep himself high in the overall standings. He wants to finish high up. He's 13th at the start of today's stage, but that really now is a serious group starting to form there at the front. Rubiera ticking out the pace as Roberto Heras did yesterday. Armstrong just sitting there, very happy to sit in the slipstream of his teammate, who is doing a marvellous job for him. Armstrong's face, Phil, shows no sign at all of any emotion at all. They are now just 14 seconds behind Laurent Jalabert. In the next half a kilometre, I expect they will see the Frenchman and rejoin him after he led this race for, again, almost 150 kilometres.
12 just men, 12 and a half if we look back, because Sevilla keeps coming in and going back again. Poor old Laurent Jalabert, for the second time in as many days, is going to look over his shoulder and see Lance Armstrong. He can't believe his luck. He's almost given us the same stroke of his head as he did last time. Another brilliant day for Jalabert. Absolutely superb to go out on the attack for 2 days like he has done. He'll be rewarded this time at the finish with the lead in the King of the Mountains, but he really desperately wanted that stage win. In the distance, Oscar Sevilla. On the front is Jose Luis Rubiera, the teammate of Armstrong. Armstrong looking for his chance, I feel, here, as the pedal revs are lifted again, the gaps open once more. This mountain is relentless now, and it's 9 kilometres still of it to go.
The two Spanish climbers on Team US Postal this year are in absolute superb condition. Last year they both had a very difficult time. Roberto Heras was nursed around the Tour de France with a very difficult tendinitis, but Jalabert can do nothing at all to stay with the acceleration of US Postal Service, so he has gone out of the back, and it's going to be very difficult for number 31 here, Oscar Sevilla, to reintegrate the group of the yellow jersey. He's doing a great job. He doesn't want to give up at all. He knows he has to ride well to keep the possibility of a high finish of Paris on his shoulders.
Well, the situation at the minute on the overall classification, remember, nobody ahead now. Laurent Jalabert, in fact, losing time to Armstrong. It would be the same with Armstrong, the leader of the race. As we look at the overall classification, Balocchi would stay second. Gonzalez de Galeano is still here. He would stay third. Rumzas is still here. He would stay fourth. Santiago Botero would stay fifth. Acevedo is in danger of losing sixth place because he's just been dropped by the group.
I have a feeling that Serrano might have been dropped as well, and Ivan Basso was in a bit of bother just earlier as well. No emotion at all for Armstrong. It seems as if the group of Axel Merckx and Levi Leipheimer are starting to recover. Leipheimer in that group just going past Laurent Jalabert, and one man who is missing at the moment is Tyler Hamilton. His teammate Carlos Sastre is in this group, but there's no sight at all of Tyler Hamilton, who leads the CSC Tiscali team of Laurent Jalabert. Jalabert, after a brave day, a huge attempt to try and get himself the win, has been blown away, but he will have the recompense of being the King of the Mountains at the end of today's stage.
You're down to 11 riders in this group now. Cheers for Carlos Sastre on the road there. He's been in the action today as he now stays in that front group. Not Tyler Hamilton, rather Levi Leipheimer, seemingly recovering a little bit on the slopes and certainly preserving 15th overall, and might well yet climb up to 14th or 13th, because most of the names up here are already ahead of him overall. And Rubiera now doing a brilliant turn. Jalabert counts them all by here, watches them go by. We saw Tyler Hamilton just pass him there, looking a little bit distressed on the climb. And Laurent Dufaux talking now with Jalabert, having a little bit of a joke. These are the men of the last 10 years of world cycling. They did it, they tried their best, it didn't work. But for Jalabert, the first prize today in the King of the Mountains awaits him in the form of a leader's jersey.
But what they have done is they've made it a very tough day today, because all day there's been a steady tempo set on the front by US Postal Service, and they will have weakened every bike rider in this race because there's been no respite at all in the pacemaking on the front. 8.5 kilometers to go to the finish, and still Jose Luis Rubiera is on the front setting the tempo. One of the men brought across to the US Postal Service with Roberto Heras to bolster the team when it came to the mountains. Tyler Hamilton now just tapping Laurent Jalabert on the shoulders to say, well done, good ride, we nearly pulled it off. And Christophe Moreau, who we will have to wait to see what the referee's decision is tonight as to whether or not he will receive punishment for punching Carlos Sastre in the face. And by the way, Carlos Sastre is getting one over on him because Carlos Sastre is in the front group right now.
That is absolutely right, and we're looking at Lance Armstrong. Sastre is the rider just near the back there. Kivilev doing a great ride here. He was 4th last year, he missed a podium place just in the final time trial of the Tour de France, but he's now riding fairly high in the overall and standing to improve his position today. The big surprise to me is Rumsas in this group, the only Lamprey rider. You can see him just peeping through on the far side. Rumsas a couple of years ago did finish 5th in the Tour of Spain, but he's largely thought of as a single day rider, but he's been very inspired since the prologue time trial in Luxembourg in this year's Tour de France.
Santiago Botero moving up there in the lime green strip of the Kelmate squad, the team that has been in this professional sport for the longest, more than any other professional team. They've been at the top end of the sport. Santiago Botero lost a bit of time yesterday, but he dropped down into 5th place, and if it hadn't been for that puncture at a very bad time, he would probably be up in 3rd or 4th place right now. He, I think, will be looking to try and get himself the stage victory today. But watch in 6th position there, the blue jersey of Roberto Heras. I think today Lance Armstrong would like to try and offer the victory to his teammate because he really would like to repay him for the work and the job that he did yesterday.
Well, there's no reason for Armstrong to attack. He's riding at the front. It's up to number 21, Balocchi, to launch an attack and try and get back some of the deficit. He's starting the day, remember, 1:12 behind Armstrong overall. The only way he'll get time back is to get past Armstrong and open up the gaps. And right now they've got Balocchi where they want him, pinned up on the inside of the mountain on the Plateau de Bay. Armstrong still relying heavily now on Rubiera, and Paul might be right. They're using Rubiera till he can't do any more and try and make a springboard for Heras.
The team have done a superb job throughout the whole of this afternoon stage. They've kept the pace very hard, making sure that the breakaway of Jalabert, Dufaux and Isidro Nozal never got more than 5 or 6 minutes, and slowly but surely they started to wind them in as soon as the slopes of this climb began. Rubiera is doing a brilliant job right now. He's been a long-seasoned professional. He turned professional back in 1995 for a very small Spanish team called Artiach, and since then he went across to Kelme, and he was brought across from Kelme to US Postal Service to ride alongside Lance Armstrong in the mountains, and that's exactly what he's doing today. He's fulfilling his contract. And look at this right now. We are looking at a mano a mano. There are 3 US Postal riders in this group, and there are 3 Once riders in this group. And I think today the tempo being set by Jose Luis Rubiera, nicknamed Chechu by all of the team, is actually striking fear into the Once riders. If they want to win this Tour de France, they've got to go out on the attack now.
The one odd man out in this group is sitting on the back there, number 207, Stéphane Goubert. He's a Frenchman of no real note, and yet he's sitting onto the hottest company of his life as he climbs up to the Plateau de Bay. Member of the Jean de la Tour team that was brought in at the very last minute. They've had 1 stage win, and it looks as though today he might well do a little bit of a ride here on the climb of the plateau. There is the Stars and Stripes, and they'll catch sight of Lance Armstrong out to lunch at the moment because he's having a little bit of intake of food as he starts the climb.
I tell you what, that's a pretty difficult thing to do, to actually eat on a mountain stage like this going uphill. Most guys will try and eat on the descent and on the flat stages if they can. Look at the pedaling action there of Rubiera on the front, just sitting tucked in nice and calmly behind him. I think they're actually picking up the pace just a little bit here. In fact, you can see this is Rubiera's kick now towards the steeper part of the climb. He's lifting the pace. I think they want to try and put time between themselves and 1 or 2 other riders. That's popped Andrei Kivilev off the back immediately, as well as Stéphane Goubert.
Well, Goubert certainly couldn't lift it up 1 more notch, doing a great ride. There he is, but Andrei Kivilev will be upset. He's going to have to dig deep, this rider from Kazakhstan, because the order's gone out from Lance to just lift the revs and see what happens. And he's reduced it by 2 riders, and here goes Heras. Now, is it pacemaking or an attack? And it might be...
Pacemaking.
I'm not sure what it is. I think it's pacemaking, yeah.
Well, it's put this man into serious difficulty as well, because they're literally blowing all of the Once riders away. Serrano now has popped off the back of the group. Roberto Heras has come forward right now. Yoshiba Belocchi is surviving, and Igor Gonzalez de Galdiano has now gone. We are going down to the same trio as yesterday: Roberto Heras, Lance Armstrong and Yoshiba Belocchi. But today they may well try and work one over on Yoshiba Belocchi, because I think this is going to be a serious show of defiance by the man on the front, Roberto Heras. He wants to drag his team leader away, and his team leader in the yellow jersey would like to give him a victory.
Just under 7 kilometers to go, and we have the same 3 riders, but Armstrong has lifted the revs. It's up to Belocchi. Belocchi must go round Heras or lose ground. He's got to come round him now, and I don't know whether he can. Armstrong has made his move. Now, he had planned to attack here when he reconnoitred the area in May. We thought he might have changed his idea, because he had the lead already yesterday, when that to him was a little bit of a surprise. Belocchi has got to come, otherwise the Tour de France for him has ended right now.
Well, Belocchi's trying to survive. He's trying to keep in contact with Armstrong, but look out for Heras. And in fact, Armstrong doesn't look to me right now to be going full bore. He's waiting to see. He's tempting Belocchi to try and close the gap down to him. And look at this. I have a feeling any moment now we will see an acceleration come from Roberto Heras, because Heras is very comfortable on the wheel of Belocchi. Armstrong right now is not opening up the big gap, and Heras is very happy just to stay there.
Well, that's his job, to sit on Yoshiba Belocchi for the last 2 years, 3rd overall in Paris in the Tour de France, currently lying in 2nd position. But now all Lance Armstrong is doing is repeating what he did in May by himself, and that's go out for a day's training. He's just sitting here pedaling like he's taught himself. The only good thing is it's a little bit warmer than it was in May. It was in the -Celsius temperatures then when he got to the top. Today it's around about 30 degrees Celsius.
Well, this was the hero of the day, and look at that time gap already. Laurent Jalabert is over 3 minutes behind Lance Armstrong at the front of the bike race.
Well, Lance Jalabert won't be at all interested in what is happening at the front of the race right now. Now, a little show of defiance by Belocchi, and I think that's all it was, because I don't think he can pick his pace up to go back up to alongside Lance Armstrong. Armstrong out of the saddle all of the time at the moment, keeping this perpetual cadence going that destroys the bike riders around the world. And once he knows he's beaten him, he'll settle back into his own rhythm. And in the next 5 kilometers, just how much time can he gain?
Well, you know, he doesn't even really need to do this. He's leading the bike race at the start of the day by 1 minute and 12 seconds. What he's doing is riding away from the rest of the field, stamping his authority on the Tour de France today. Put all this into perspective, by the way, Phil. Laurent Jalabert has lost 6 minutes on the climb so far, and this is the group behind, and look how Botero is suffering. He's up alongside Serrano and Igor Gonzalez de Galdiano, the man who led this race for such a long time. These men now can only hope to survive. There is Raimundas Rumsas on the far side, and Armstrong is slowly but surely opening the gap between himself and Yoshiba Belocchi and his own teammate Roberto Heras.
Rumsas looking back here to Serrano. Is anybody going to help me? Gonzalez de Galdiano. These riders are together with Rumsas. Nobody going to help out here. Botero is there. 4 great mountain climbers rather, and they can't get near this man, who often tells us he's not a climber. It's a different type of racing as far as he's concerned. He just pedals quickly and rides them all off his wheel. Richard Virenque looks as though he's just come out of the shower right now. 5 times a winner of the King of the Mountains. Take a bottle and receive that little professional foul, a little push off the offering hand there from the director sportif. But nobody's going to complain about that. This is a vicious day in the Tour de France, as Armstrong now, through the exhaust fumes of our helicopter and the shimmering heat of a hot day on the Plateau de Bataille, is now going to put his name in the record books. The only other man who's won here is Marco Pantani.
Well, I think that was a correct slip of the tongue you made there, Phil, because Plateau de Bataille means the plateau of the battle, and that's exactly what's happening right now. This is a huge battle that Armstrong is delivering to himself and to the men who expect to outthrone him. And look at that, the gap is now becoming much more serious. It's slowly but surely opening. It's now hovering at 15 seconds. Roberto Heras is just sitting there for the moment, waiting to see if Bilocchi will fail. And if Bilocchi does fail, I wouldn't be surprised to see Roberto Heras launching the counter-attack. It's still an awful long way to go to the summit for Lance Armstrong right now, and he still has the frame of mind to sit up, breathe easily as he can, and take the drinks on board.
Well, in effect, Heras is 5 full minutes of taking second place in the Tour de France. At the moment, he's not in a position to do much about it as we go under 5 kilometres. Yes, still 5 kilometres to go. But there is a real chance, people already talking of a US Postal 1-2 in this year's race as we switch back to the fatigue of Laurent Jalabert, because in the mountains still to come, this is a very tough tour now. A relatively calmer day tomorrow, then we climb the Giant of Provence, Mont Ventoux, and then we have 2 brutes, La Plagne and Les Deux Alpes in the Alps before we go on to the final time trial, and then the finish in Paris. Still an awful lot of racing to go, but there is nobody does not believe that Armstrong is not now going to win this tour by less than 10 minutes.
Face there on Yoshiba Bilocchi, he's really suffering. Armstrong is not opening up a huge gap at all. In fact, it's just crept up a couple more seconds to 17 seconds, and Bilocchi is basically riding his individual time trial right now. He is trying to limit his losses on the Texan, who's gone off on the hope of another lone victory, just like the victory he got himself yesterday. He would love to have offered that victory to the man who wears number 3 there, Roberto Heras, but what an incredible pedaling action of this man, who after his testicular cancer, Phil, lost himself 20 pounds in body weight, but he retained nearly all of the strength that he had. Heras is gone. Heras has attacked, and now this is what they were waiting for. This is, I think, why Armstrong hasn't opened up the gap at all. He was looking at the Spaniard who was in front of him. Look at this. He waited to see Bilocchi suffering, and he went straight over the top of him. This was the strongest man of the race yesterday, and very quickly Armstrong will get that information from Johan Brunel. I think it'll be 1-2 tonight.
He will wait. Once he knows he has cracked Bilocchi, he will wait for Heras, and he will give him the stage as a present from yesterday. That would be the form, I would think, of the team, and it's working out to perfection. Now, this little climber from Spain, magnificent yesterday, the outstanding man on the mountain, is now flying towards his captain.
But what a professional. He looked over his shoulder to make sure that he had a very good gap between himself and Yoshiba Bilocchi, because he would not want at all to drag up Armstrong's competitor up to the wheel of the man who wears number 1. In a few moments' time, Armstrong will certainly get that information from Johan Brunel. He will lift his pedaling action just a small amount, and I think he has done that right now, and he will very shortly be with Armstrong, and what a sight that will be.
Well, the American flag is waving there for this brilliant athlete. Once given a 20% chance of life because of a cancer, he's recovered and returned to win the Tour de France 3 times, and no one will give you odds against him winning it a 4th. Here we are in the first mountain stretch of this year's race, the Pyrenees. Little Roberto Heras, Lance selected him, handpicked him, brought him to the team to help him in the mountains. Now he's going to wait for him, and I think will give him the stage win, because yesterday, he says, Heras was simply fantastic, and if he could have let him win yesterday, he would have done. But it was too dangerous because Yoshiba Bilocchi was right there as well. Now Armstrong keeps the revs up, but he knows the little man from Spain will pedal just as quickly as he can as we head towards the summit of the Plateau de Bataille. And I think, and I've lost count now, we're looking for a 4-kilometre banner. Yes, we are. 4 kilometres to go for Lance Armstrong. The clock will start now on Roberto Heras.
Well, they're coming out of the very steep part of the climb right now. There's the 4-kilometre banner that Armstrong went under a few moments ago. And here is Roberto Heras. What a beautiful pedaling action. This man is a brilliant little climber, and one day he too may win the Tour de France. He came alongside Lance Armstrong to learn, to try and improve his time trialing ability. But Bilocchi is also making a pretty smart recovery here too. he is inside that gap as well. 12 seconds to Roberto Heras. They're on the false flat part of this course right now. This is the part of the course where you can get the big gear in and start ticking it over. And you can see there Bellocchi changing up the gears.
Well, this is the plateau bit of the climb now, and Armstrong knows he's coming. He looked over his shoulder. There are the gaps, 13 seconds and 25, as Lance Armstrong now just keeps his rhythm going. He would dearly love Heras to come alongside him and say thanks for everything you've done for 2 days for me in the mountains, and he's given him a brilliant lead overall now. He'll be heading out to at least a minute and a half in the classification tonight, unless Bellocchi recovers on this false flat. Heras looking over his shoulder to see. If Bellocchi catches him, of course, Heras will stop working. He won't continue to take him up to the leader, and he's always checking on that. The face of the fighter, the only fighter seemingly in this year's Tour de France who believes he can have some form of combat with Armstrong.
The gaps are very close indeed right now. Armstrong leads Roberto Heras by 14 seconds. In fact, Heras is slipping back, and it's then just 12 seconds to Yoshiba Bellocchi. If Heras doesn't close the gap on Armstrong right this moment, it's going to be Armstrong riding on his own towards victory. Armstrong really dare not slow down too much, because he needs to build his advantage over Bellocchi, his advantage which was at the start of today 1 minute and 12 seconds.
There's a small time bonus on the line as well, which will push him out even further. But the other two will also get time bonuses, which won't completely nullify the escape. But Armstrong himself now just doing all he need do to increase his lead in today's stage of the Tour de France. There is just those 10 seconds between the two Spanish riders. Bellocchi looks to me as though he's coming back, because Heras has decided he can't reach his captain.
I think he was told to sit up there, because just at the moment when the US Postal Service team car went by, I think that was the moment he ceased to chase the front man Lance Armstrong. He will now wait for Yoshiba Bellocchi, and I think allow Yoshiba Bellocchi to set the tempo behind. What was happening there was that Heras was caught in between the two men, and he was acting as a carrot, and he was the man that in fact Yoshiba Bellocchi was aiming at to catch, and that was encouraging the man who's in third place on the road.
Far down the slopes now, the ailing figure of Laurent Jalabert wants the leader. As we now see at 3 kilometers to go, Heras has turned off. Bellocchi is coming back, so Heras will now sit behind him and wait, and maybe choose to sprint to second place. Armstrong has been given his head now as the leader of the team to build on his overall position and to increase his lead in the Tour de France tonight. There is Roberto Heras taking now the ticket collector's position, the man who will do no work and just see everybody is on board.
Well, if this had been just a little bit steeper than it is right now, I think Roberto Heras would have made contact with Lance Armstrong. But Armstrong is on the part of the course which absolutely suits him. He can use his special power to get the bigger gear ticking over right now. And he has now started to build the big time gap over Yoshiba Bellocchi. It is now 35 seconds to Heras and Bellocchi right now. Heras has to play the team role. He was hoping, I think, to get himself a victory here. Coming back, this is Santiago Botero. And in fact, it looks as if the man Igor Gonzalez de Galdiano is also pulling himself slowly but surely back to his own teammate.
Well, trying to, as the gaps close together, because the queen bee of the pack has just simply flown away and left the workers on the mountainside. And here he is, just riding to glory. This will be his 14th stage win in a Tour de France. A stage win which has gone past the memorial stone to his friend Fabio Casatelli. Means a lot to Lance as he now continues his way to the top of the plateau. The kilometers are a little bit easier now as we start to level out on this beautiful mountain, covered in thousands of people today to watch an American ride to victory again.
Well, look at this pedaling action as well, Phil. That's the pedaling action that exactly the same as he had in the team time trial some time ago. And you look at that compared to the pedaling action of these two riders right now. It was that pedaling action that may well have lost Lance Armstrong the individual time trial around Lorient. But right now it is being used to absolute perfection on the last 2 kilometers of the climb up here to the Plateau de Bay.
2 kilometers, less than 2 miles, 1.8 to be precise for Lance Armstrong. And he's in amongst the motorbikes now. They'll chase those away. as he continues progress towards the summit, as everybody just simply goes berserk here. This is what they wanted to see. They've waited probably 8 hours and perhaps even 24 for those that came last night. The Basque flags are flying and they're waving at an American who is destroying the riders from Spain as he just rides towards the summit. A bigger lead in the Tour de France today, and no one will give you any odds now as to who will win this year's Tour de France.
Well, under the banner there of 2 kilometres to go, it's 32 seconds to these two chasers right now. But the position of their pedalling action is completely different to that of Lance Armstrong. They are now just hoping to survive. Yoshiba Belocchi is trying to increase his advantage in the second place at the Tour de France this year. And Roberto Heras is going to leap up the overall standing this afternoon. Probably he will find himself well inside of the top 10. But Armstrong, Phil, is ticking away with that most unbelievable pedalling action which he has cultivated over the years since he came back from testicular cancer. The crowd here are encouraging every bike rider. They're even encouraging Lance Armstrong at the front. Even though the majority of people here are Basque, they are recognizing what is an unbelievable athletic performance.
Well, they're shouting because they're saluting magnificent athletes here in the Pyrenees who have ridden to the maximum over some of the highest mountains this country has to offer. One man has proved he is head and shoulders above everybody else, but they'll shout even the last man home. It's a tremendous achievement by all of the riders, but what can you continue to say about this man? Superlatives simply don't describe just how he rides a bike. He comes here in the winter, he checks every inch of the road, he knows exactly where he's going to attack, exactly what he's going to do. He doesn't care who enters the Tour de France, he just sticks to the game plan.
And the game plan he's got worked out very many months in advance, and that's why he comes to look at these courses, and that's why he plans everything down to the final little minute of his attacks. Laurent Jalabert is almost 3 kilometers behind Lance Armstrong on this climb. That 3 kilometers is going to take him around about 9 minutes to cover. Armstrong right now can see the Flamme Rouge in front of him. That little bridge over the road you can see there is the last kilometer of today's stage, and Armstrong still shows no signs of weakness at all. He's pedaling absolutely perfectly. This special cadence he's managed to cultivate over the last few years is very reminiscent of the cadence in the mountains of Miguel Indurain, and the great Spaniard. He won 5 Tour de France's in a row.
Well, he's nosing away to almost a minute on the chase now, a minute added to the 1:12 he already has, plus his small time bonus on the line. He'll be not far off 2.5 minutes, it might even be nearer 3 minutes overall when we see the final situation tonight. Armstrong taking the shortest way to the summit of the plateau and building on every inch of the way. This will be his 6th win of the season, and well, I won't say it'll be the sweetest, but it'll just be another routine day for this magnificent athlete.
It reminds me what we said very much earlier on today, Phil, you and I, comme d'habitude, it said in the French newspapers this morning, business as usual. That's exactly what it has been for Lance Armstrong this afternoon, and that's also what it has been for his team, who've done a magnificent job setting up this victory. Yoshiba Belocchi is the man wearing number 21 there. He's just trying to keep himself as close to as possible to Lance Armstrong this afternoon, and Armstrong's teammate there wearing number 3, Roberto Heras, again doing an absolutely superb job to set up victory number 14 for Lance Armstrong here in stages at the Tour de France.
And no one currently racing in the professional circuit has won that many stages in a Tour de France. 14 for Lance Armstrong. He'll claim his 3rd yellow jersey of the Tour, having won the prologue and his 3rd stage in this year's Tour de France. And on this sort of form, Paul, just how many stages can he win? The record, by the way, is held by Freddie Martins, and in post-war years by Freddie Martins and Eddie Merckx, 8 wins.
Well, you know, if you look at the number of mountaintop finishes that are still left to go, Lance Armstrong could probably win most of those as well. I think he may well just try and ride a much more tactical race going into the next big mountains terrain, which is going to be the Mont Ventoux and then followed by the Alps. But this is going to go down as a great victory, one that was set up perfectly by his team. He's inside 200 meters to go right now.
Lance Armstrong left no doubt in anybody's mind, the #1 bike rider, the winner of the Tour de France for the past 3 years, and he will be the world ranked #1 by the end of this tour again, as he now races to increase his overall lead two profitable days here in the Pyrenees. Yesterday it was close, 6 hours aboard that saddle, and this time a little punch in the air yesterday. It's a clear two-arm salute today, because today he laid the foundation which will win him the Tour de France again this year.
And did you see that, Phil? 6 hours in the saddle, an average speed of only 33 kilometers an hour today. That's 19 miles an hour. That gives you an idea of just how difficult today's stage has been. Yoshiba Belocchi now is just trying to lose as little time as possible, but he's already lost himself 30 seconds on the clock on the finishing line. That added up to the bonus is 50, so it's going to be a big plummet down tonight.
Well, I wonder if Heras will make it a 1-2 for US Postal. He's itching to go over the top of him. He'll wait till he sees the line at 45 seconds the gap. Belocchi won't have the legs now. He's tried to limit his losses as a little Roberto Heras grits his teeth, drives up to the line. US Postal first and second. Heras will climb up the overall classification tonight. He might even get a separate time as he comes round to the line. A minute and 2 behind, a minute 3, and probably a minute 5 for Josiba Belocchi, as Botero comes in after that, and Igor Gonzalez de Galeano after that.
Well, that was a very smooth effort by Roberto Heras. He had to take second place there. He had to take the time bonuses away. Coming in as well for sixth place there is Raimundas Rumsas. A good ride by him, only conceding a minute 25. He'll keep himself high up in the overall standings this afternoon as well. And also coming across the line there, Carlos Sastre. These men are going to come in, Phil, for the next 40 minutes. We will see men dragging themselves up this very difficult mountain.
Well, I'm just looking at the faces of some of the public here. They've waited for hours and hours to see these cyclists arrive, and many of the faces are simply struck in awe at the sight of these riders flopping into the arms of their helpers as they cross over the line. This is the arrival now of Oscar Sevilla. He's not that far behind, just 2 minutes, and he has fought all day to hold those riders in sight, and he's done a last great climb of the plateau. 2:08 for him, and he'll still occupy a very high position in the overall, as Andrei Kivilev also comes up to the line now.
Well, it never fails to amaze us just how much better Lance Armstrong is than the rest of the world. And if he goes on to win his 4th straight Tour de France, we'll look back at these 2 stages in the Pyrenees as the ones that did it for him. Lance Armstrong, 14 stage wins and counting. And welcome back to the finish of stage 12. There is the old man of the mountains, Laurent Jalabert. Again, he fought so valiantly. There's Richard Virenque finishing up the rest of the field coming across the line here at Plateau de Bay. Moments ago, the first American finisher behind Lance Armstrong was Levi Leipheimer. He finished a distant 2:15 behind the winning time of Lance Armstrong. There is Jaja doing what he can. Again, he will be the king of the mountains at the end of today's stage, heading into tomorrow's stage 13, which is kind of an easy day for the guys compared to this. Well, Plateau de Bay will always be here. No one will ever tame this hill, but Lance certainly left his footprint today. Let's go back to Phil and Paul.
Well, you can see now coming up to the line of Vladimiro Belli and Laurent Dufaux. Laurent Dufaux, who was a long time at the front of this bike race, and he, in fact, has got blown away, and he's got it with him. Ivan Basso, the man who was the best white jersey, the best young rider at the start of this morning stage. I think he may well keep hold of that lead in the competition there, because, in fact, he has ridden fairly well up the last few kilometers, losing himself 6 minutes and 52 seconds. Well, it's quite remarkable. Armstrong getting himself the win there ahead of Roberto Heras and Joseba Belocchi. Santiago Botero doing a great ride and recovering after yesterday to come up to the finish in 4th place. Igor Gonzalez de Galdeano was in 5th place at the end of today, and Raimundas Rumsas putting in a fine performance there to get 6th.
Still the riders are coming as they come up the mountain, and look at this now. The hill is biting, biting, biting. And as I say, we cannot start the prize presentation today without the hero, Laurent Jalabert. Laurent Jalabert looks over to see who is coming by him, and he doesn't care anyway. The top of the Plateau de Bay is still a long way off for him. That's the kilometre around the corner, 6/10 of a mile. Jalabert will just, well, I don't know, he's pushing himself into this situation for 2 days running, Paula. This looks like Christophe Brandt, the youngster in the Tour, coming up, and a very, very good ride by him too. In his first Tour de France, he looks at the clock, sees 8 minutes, blows a little bit of air out, but that was a great ride by Christophe Brandt today, a young man in his first Tour de France.
Well, he's learned a lot about suffering today, because this has been a very difficult race. A lot of the riders of CSC Tiscali coming in here, and Inigo Cuesta trying to give Laurent Jalabert a bit of encouragement. They all know what Jalabert has been through today. Every bike rider who has been on a long breakaway in his career, whether it be in a small race around the local town or in a big race like the Tour de France, knows just exactly what it's like when the lights go out. And that's exactly what's happened to Laurent Jalabert right now. He put everything into this race today to try and blow it to pieces after doing exactly the same thing yesterday. He's just cruising up this last 500-600 meters, but what a day he's made here in the Pyrenees. He has made this a very tough and difficult stage, and basically made it tough for Lance Armstrong and all of the men who wanted to try and dethrone him.
He is a giant of a man in the Tour de France, and the clock has just tipped over 9 minutes now as he creeps his way to the top. And a polka dot jersey awaits him as we say farewell to the Pyrenees tomorrow. And for Jalabert, farewell as a rider in the Tour de France, as he will retire at the end of the year. He's taken this race to everybody these past 2 days. The crowd have loved him for it, and if only the situation had been different, he might have even have got the stage when he did so much want. But there's still the Alps, Paul.
There's still the Alps. I've just caught a quick glimpse in front of us of Floyd Landis coming in. There's another man who's learned a lot about bike racing today as well, Phil, after this very tough stage. Here, all the Frenchmen are encouraging Laurent Jalabert. In fact, that was pretty funny. You saw there, just coming up alongside him was the man who is the most aggressive bike rider in the Tour de France so far, and I would think that title will go across to Laurent Jalabert tonight. Bobby Julich as well, just closest to the camera there, wearing number 17.
The rider with him there was Jerome Pinot, the youngest man in the race, who was in a breakaway with him and left behind by him a few days ago, just saying that you've tried your best. As the race continues to finish, Laurent Brochard finishing on the left of our picture here. All of the riders fighting the way to the top of the plateau. They'll be glad to see the end of the Pyrenees today. Vierzeberg perhaps also finishing in the 3rd place there. Yes, it is, at 10.5 minutes out. And still this crowd claps and claps and claps as the riders conquer the mountains. He's now under escort here by Bobby Julich at the back, 2 Frenchmen, Jackie Giron, and the youngest rider in the Tour de France, number 117, Jerome Pinot, and Frank Renier it is on the far side, the new aggressive rider there. They're bringing Laurent Jalabert home. Well, it's the young and the old. They're talking and chatting. Jalabert saying goodbye to the sport, while the rider nearest camera saying hello, because it's his first Tour de France.
Well, what a great ride by Jaja. He's saying goodbye to the Pyrenees, and in fine style as well, because he really is the man today who, as we like to say, lit the blue touch paper on today's stage. He really blew it apart.
The fireworks off, Paul. Well, there's going to be a terrific roar now, because I can hear Daniel Manjas priming the crowd to welcome Laurent Jalabert. At 100 meters, listen to them for yourselves as he crosses the line, 11.5 minutes down. Well, I've never seen a gesture like that before on a stage of the Tour de France, from Frank Renier saluting Laurent Jalabert.
What a wonderful sight that was. Jaja, just adored by fans, teammates, countrymen alike, finishing here, stage 12. But there's the man of the hour, the man of the day. Again, Lance Armstrong. And so it is time for our Lincoln Ride of the Day. And there's not much doubt about this one. Lance Armstrong in the final stages of this oh-so-brutal climb up to the Plateau de Bay, passing Laurent Jalabert for the stage lead, leaving Joseba Belaki and the rest of the opposing teams in his wake. Lance had so much in reserve and pulled away going up this 8% grade, this 16 5-kilometer hell ride at the end. Lance Armstrong winning his 14th career stage at the Tour de France. Lance Armstrong with our Lincoln Ride of the Day. We are back. A beautiful day here in the Pyrenees. We'll be right back as our post-race show continues. And we are back. It's our Tour de France post-race show. We are at Plateau de Bay, the end of stage 12. Lance Armstrong, of course, winning. I mean, what do you expect? Phil and Paul, I mean, how do you put this into words? What message did Lance send to the field? As far as I'm concerned, the message is he can do what he wants, whenever he wants.
I think that about sums it up. That is exactly the case, because this man is cool and calculated. He is clearly the strongest rider in the Tour de France, and he's established the lead he wanted in the Pyrenees. It'll be a great battle on Mont Ventoux on Sunday, because if he destroys the field there, it's going to be a big procession to Paris for Lance and a long way. The overall situation, Armstrong, by the way, is now leading the Tour. There you are, by 2 minutes and 28 seconds. 3 minutes 19 seconds ahead of Gonzalez de Galdiano, who led for 7 days. Rumsas is the big revelation in many ways from Lithuania, 5:15 back. Botero, harassed today, comes up into 7th place as Armstrong Paul gets the yellow jersey again. 2 days in yellow, and of course one at the beginning.
Well, you know, one team should get the yellow jersey as well, because US Postal today, Phil, did an absolutely superb job. And I think, Bill, the one thing you have to understand is, although Lance Armstrong is an absolutely brilliant individual, he can't ride like this without a team. He needs the team all of the way.
Oh, certainly not. Roberto Harris showing us each day just how much grit and determination and willpower and reserve he has as well. And let's talk about the emotion of this day for Lance. His friend killed here 7 years ago. How much do you think emotion played in his winning this stage?
Well, you know, Lance Armstrong was a very close friend of Fabio Casatelli, and they went past that memorial earlier on in the stage. I think it's always an emotional moment for Armstrong, and we all know, I think, that Armstrong is a man who enjoys riding on emotion, and he rides to the occasion, and he will have had a thought coming up to the finishing line for Fabio Casatelli.
No question about that, Paul, and again, that's why I think it inspired him to victory. But there's the confirmation of the stage result. Heras getting a US Postal 1-2, coming in 64 seconds after Armstrong. Now, if Heras had remained chasing Armstrong, it might have been less than that, because Bolocki hadn't given up. And that's probably why Johan Brunel suggested to Heras he desisted and stopped chasing Armstrong for the finish. Bolocki is proving to be a very, very plucky rider, and thank heavens he's in the Tour, because he's giving us at least some hope that Armstrong will have a good race all the way to Paris.
It would have also been a different overall standings as well if Santiago Botero had not lost 2.5 minutes yesterday, having that flat tyre at a very bad time. But this backdrop here, Phil, of the Pyrenees is absolutely superb. Listen to the crowd.
Yep. Laurent Jalabert has got back the jersey he won last year in Paris, and let's hope he can do it again this year, and I think he can. 2 superb days in the Pyrenees. They weren't topped with stage wins, but this man pushed himself to his absolute limit yesterday and has done the same today. But today, the crowd and the Tour de France itself appreciated his efforts.
I tell you what, he's going to take this King of the Mountains jersey, I think, to Paris if he can do rides like that in the mountains of the Alps. But what a tough way to get those points. Normally, the King of the Mountains is won by men accelerating in the last 200 or 300 meters towards the summit of the climb. I think every bike rider in the peloton today realizes what a superb performance Laurent Jalabert put in. And whenever anybody caught him as he blew up on the slopes of this final climb of the day, they congratulated him and even encouraged him and paced him up towards the finish line. This is a great ambassador for the support.
Bobby Julich, who finished 3rd at the Plateau in 1998, escorting him home here with 2 Frenchmen, Frank Renier and Jerome Pinault. Pinault, the youngest rider in the Tour, and that was a marvellous occasion for everybody concerned, I think. Well, there is the beauty of the Pyrenees here as we now wait to see who is next on the stand. It should be Eric Zabel. No, it's not. It's going to be Ivan Basso, the white leader. We're still waiting for Zabel, in fact, to finish, so we couldn't have the green jersey competition yet. This man keeps the white jersey as best young rider. He suffered today, Paul. He didn't have such a good a day as yesterday,
Well, it's a difficult day for him, but it was a difficult day for everybody just because of the fact that this race was run off at 19 miles an hour with 5 big mountain climbs to go over. And you can see by the way he's walking there, Phil, that the legs are pretty tight this evening.
Well, I'm not surprised. I was amazed that Laurent Jalabert could even climb up onto the podium a few moments ago. But Yvon Basso crashed out of the Tour last year when he was in a great position and broke his collarbone. And then he finished the stage, by the way, but he couldn't come out next day. Let's hope he gets all the way to Paris this time around. He's a very, very good bike rider. Well,
all right, Phil and Paul, thank you very much. Well, what looms ahead? Kind of an easy day tomorrow, stage 13. We'll look ahead to that. And down the road, the Giant of Provence on Sunday, Mont Ventoux in the distance. We'll discuss those 2 stages and more when our post-race show continues. Don't go away. And welcome back, everybody, to Plateau de Bay on this absolutely brilliant day here in the French Pyrenees. Stage 12 just about in the books. There are still some riders trying to finish up, but they went over 5 categorized mountains today, and it was absolutely brutal. What can we say about Lance Armstrong? He took the lead yesterday. Today, he took control. Frankie Andreu caught up with him right after the finish.
Congratulations. Thank you. Lance, it looked like today, again, to win the stage, but also looked like a day to take maximum time out on your opponents. Well, actually, our biggest ambition was to try to get the stage win for Roberto. And again, the team was awesome all day. They rode at the front over all those climbs, never dropped anybody, got to the final climb with a full team. So it was incredible, and had a little strategy going on the last climb and thought we had Roberto coming across, but Baloki came back to him.
How did you decide where you're going to attack today? Early on to take the maximum amount of time? And I mean, what makes you give the feel that it's time to go?
No, I mean, most of the climb, Chechu did the tempo, and it was good enough to get to whittle it down to 10 guys, I think, and then he kind of had enough, and Roberto started pulling. Immediately went down to just like yesterday, Roberto, myself, and Baloki, and I didn't want him to ride at the front like he did yesterday and not get something out of it, so I went to the front to do some work. Hopefully that we could get rid of Baloki and get that stage win for Roberto. But when I turned around, I had a little gap, and then Johan on the radio told Roberto just to sit on his wheel and make him work, and it worked out. But we got to get a win for Roberto.
I was going to say, I mean, yellow jersey is becoming more firmly in your hand. So the objective now will be to get maybe Roberto a stage win, but he's riding so good, maybe even second overall.
Hey, I mean, had he not had a bad time trial because of the crash and because of feeling banged up, he would. It's a very real possibility.
The climb today, you feel it's one of the hardest in the Tour, or Ventoux maybe is harder?
No, Ventoux's a lot harder. Ventoux's a hell of a lot harder. But it's a hard climb. Done it one time in a race before and then done it in training. It looks totally different when you're doing the Tour because you have thousands of people, but it's a hard climb, and it's very warm today.
Congratulations, Lance. Thank you.
All right, Frankie Andreu with our winner, Lance Armstrong, who again voiced his disappointment that he couldn't get Roberto Heras, his U.S. Postal teammate, the win. But c'est la vie. Joseba Balaky now 2:28 behind Lance in the overall standings. Igor Gonzalez de Galdeano, who wore the yellow for about a week or so now, finds himself 3:19 behind Armstrong. Now, Phil and Paul, let's talk about tomorrow's stage 13, really a sprinter's stage as we move out of the Pyrenees into the flatlands.
Yeah, I think it will be a sprinter stage. Actually, while this has been happening, we've just seen Eric Zabel finish. He's losing 24 minutes today. Robbie McEwen isn't in yet. Presuming he doesn't get chopped out on the time delay, which we don't expect, then tomorrow I think will be a sprinter stage. A few ripples early on, Paul, and then it's right down to sea level to Béziers.
Well, actually, I beg to differ with you because
well done.
After 2 big, hard days in the mountains, I think it would be a very good day for the men to go out on the attack. And these roads in the south of France are very long and hard, and they are undulating. It might look flat on the profile, but because of the temperature that comes down to this part of France and the big winds across the road to Béziers, it should be a good day for the attackers.
Well,
that's good to hear.
A lot of tired legs down there.
Yeah, Phil and Paul, I hate it when you guys agree. I hate it when all three of us agree on anything, so that's going to be something to look forward to. And on Sunday, Mont Ventoux, Lance said it's the toughest of all.
Yes, Mont Ventoux, I think we all agree on this, don't we, Paul? It is a pretty hard climb. Did you ever climb Mont Ventoux?
I climbed it in a couple of races which weren't the Tour de France, and it is an unbelievable beast. It's a climb that really goes on forever and ever. You're just waiting for it to finish. It's a nasty climb, and Lance is right when he says it is one of the toughest climbs of the Tour de France. It is also one that you can never overestimate.
And the weather forecast is very, very hot, and Ventoux is at its worst when the sun is there because it's totally barren. And I believe that Armstrong will launch another attack there. He has selected the places he wants to attack in this year's Tour de France. He did that before he even came to the race. One was today, and we've seen what has happened. I am pretty sure, and I've got no inside information, that the other one is Mont Ventoux. And my goodness me, if that happens, this field is going to be spread all over the Provence area, because that's the only challenge of the day, and it's a long way to the base of Mont Ventoux.
All right, Phil and Paul, thank you so much. Once again, well, Lance Armstrong has put his stamp on this 2002 Tour de France. He wins stage 12 going away, making it look like child's play, really. His teammate Roberto Heras comes in second, more than a minute behind. Joseba Bilacky right there with him. So in the overall standings, it's Lance, followed by Bilacky, and then Igor Gonzalez de Galdeano. And that's going to do it for stage 12. Thank you so much for joining us. We are back tomorrow, of course, with stage 13. Join us for our live coverage starting at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. Our highlight show at 9 Eastern, 10 Pacific tomorrow night for in-depth coverage you won't see anywhere else. Tomorrow morning, again, stage 13, back at 9:30 in the morning for live coverage. Our highlight show, as always, 9 Eastern, 10 Pacific for in-depth coverage you just won't see anywhere else. As far as the climbers are concerned, well, it gets a bit easier tomorrow. The sprinters get a chance to show off again. That's what I think anyway. Paul disagrees, but the stage takes us down the foothills of the Pyrenees, back into the flatlands. The first 50 kilometers or so featuring 3 categorized climbs, but it flattens out considerably at the finish in Béziers. And we invite you to log on to olntv.com, the official English language site of the Tour de France, for everything you need to know about the Tour and all things outdoors, of course. Once again, thanks for watching OLN's coverage of the Tour de France. For Phil Liggett, Paul Sherwen, Frankie Andreu, and our entire OLN production team here, I'm Bill Patrick. So long from Plateau de Bay.
Hey.